everybody today. Happy Hanukkah. We're so joyed to be with you today, live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman, Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the fathers. We just finished chapter 2, Mishnah 2 last week, and Rabbi's all excited to share with us part 3 or Mishnah 3 of chapter 2. This is an exciting class, and I don't know how anybody in this world can get by without ethics. We all have to have some moral compass of sorts in order to function in this world. And there's nothing better than hearing the ethics of the fathers from the Hebrew people. And so without any further delay, Rabbi Coffman, happy Hanukkah to you. Welcome to all Israel.
Pleasure to be here. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. I mean, non-Jews shouldn't be celebrating it, so we'll just make that clear. For any Jews out there, you shouldn't be watching this now because it's probably Shabbos for you, right? Anyway, but we're not even going to go down that path. Well, you wait for my next Tanakh Talk issue on
controversial
on Monday. Speak about no hides and different things. This Mishnah, we'll see how far we're going to get here because you never know how long it's going to take to go through certain things, but we got plenty of time. Nonetheless, Mishnah going to hit, I think, a few very interesting, apropos issues, which, as our gracious host always says, you can't go wrong with ethics. Well, we live in a very unethical world.
Right.
Unfortunately, we see it all the time, and we see it with government. Right? I don't think it's any clearer, regardless of which side. We're not going to get into politics, right? Regardless of which side you're on, very hard to say there's been 100% ethics in any election, not just this one, right? But, across the board. One thing I learned when I was in social studies, 9th grade, is power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's one of the few things I remember, from that. So we're going to speak about rulers. The Mishnah says, again, we're in the second chapter, because we're going to be in the second chapter for a while. Second chapter, third Mishnah. And, it's funny, I labeled it part 1. This could be like part 2, part 3, part 4. I don't know how many parts it's going to be, but whatever, we're going to see. So the Mishnah says, beware of rulers, for they befriend someone only for their own benefit. Isn't that the truth? Right? They're going to befriend, the Mishnah says they're going to befriend someone only for their own benefit. They act friendly when it benefits them, but they do not stand by someone in his time of need. You look at recent politics, someone gets slammed, shredded. Where are people to help? You got some people. Where's everybody else? Right? So when the chips are down, a person goes by the wayside. So the first part of the Mishnah, or really the whole Mishnah, here when it says, beware of rulers, that they befriend someone for their own sake. Now, what are we talking about? Right? We're talking about someone working for the community. Remember, we spoke a whole bunch of classes before, the last 2-3 classes, about the community and working for the community and having the merit of your forefathers, right? That's how you'll be successful. So he says, so now it's a continuation. If you're working for the community, who do you have to be careful of? The ones in charge. You have to be careful with the rulers, as the Mishnah states here. Now, we learn we're not just talking about non-Jewish rulers. That's easy, right? Because if they don't have a moral code, they're more corrupt than anybody else, right? What's going to keep their morality? How much people are paying them, right? That's what's going to, keep them on the whatever path they want to go to, whoever's lining their pockets. They'll say one thing and do something else. Contradictions, left and right politicians, right? I don't think there's any question. I don't think there's any question about that. So that's easy by a non-Jew. But we also learn over here, they could be talking about Jews, right? We could be talking about Jewish rulers. Now, shouldn't a Jewish ruler go by the Torah? Right? We would assume Jewish rulers would go by the Torah. Plenty of Jews, though, that may have power, even if they are rulers, don't necessarily go by the good book, right? They go by their own quote unquote moral guide. Right? They have their own agenda. And their own agenda may certainly go against what the Torah says. It probably, I shouldn't say, it probably does. Because, we were speaking in earlier, around, the Shabbos table about cardiac Jews, right? What's a cardiac Jew? A Jew in my heart, right? I feel good in my heart, right? There are a lot of Jews, there are a lot of Jews light a Hanukkah menorah. Now, it's interesting that, we're in Hanukkah. Maybe we'll speak about Hanukkah for a second. What is Hanukkah about? What did the Greeks do? The Greeks wanted the Jews, we say 3 times a day, in the middle of silent meditation, Shemona Esrei, whatever you want to call it. There's a special prayer. There's a special prayer on Hanukkah. So one of the things it says is they wanted us to forget Torah. Now, what did they do? They made decrees. They made decrees against circumcision. They made decrees against Rosh Chodesh, against the new month. They made decrees against the Sabbath, right? Not keeping the Sabbath. Now, there's a major difference between the Greeks and Mr. Haman himself in the book of Esther. Everybody knew what did Haman want to do? Annihilate the Jewish people. Kill, not spiritually, physically. Even if you had a quarter of Jewish blood, half Jewish blood. Their goal, nothing to talk about, destroy the Jewish people physically. Come along the Greeks, okay, they made decrees. Everybody knows they made certain decrees. The Greeks were not the Germans. The Greeks wanted us to what? Forget Torah. Now, how do we look at the Greeks? We look at the Greeks as darkness. Right? Now, what did the Greeks bring to the world? There are many things that we do in this world. We're living in a Greek world. So if we're living in a Greek world, they brought education. Right? They brought the Renaissance. The roads, the aqueducts, right? The aqueducts go back to Life of Brian, Monty Python. Anyway, I don't want to digress here. So they brought all these things to the world, right? Not belief in God. That, anything they could not fathom beyond themselves, right? Aristotle said it. Socrates said it. Anything I cannot fathom beyond myself doesn't exist. Right? Absolutely doesn't exist. So students of the Vilna Gaon of Elijah Vilna more than 250 years ago, they asked him, how can that be? How could they not fathom, so far, that they can't see something beyond what they understand. So the Vilna Gaon said, very simple. He said, if I would say a certain ineffable name of God, and I would bring all the constellations in this room right now, they'd say, hey, Doug Henning, Siegfried and Roy, right? They'd say, hey,
David
where
Copperfield,
the mirrors?
yeah.
Right? Where are the mirrors? Great magician. How did he do it? Right? So the Vilna Gaon said, how do I know that they wouldn't believe it even if I did it in front of their face? Because they lived in the time of great righteous people. Right? They lived in the time of Shmuel HaKatan, right? Who helped devise the prayer of the Shemona Esrei, one of the most righteous people ever lived. And he said, if they weren't in awe of who this person was, then no matter what I do, it's not going to matter. Because it's only what I think. It's going beyond what I can see. I'm not interested, right? Come on, that's a leap of faith, right? So what do the Greeks want? So the Greeks, yes, they made decrees, but what did the Greeks do? They wanted you to forget Torah. They wanted you to say, okay, like Moshe Mendelssohn said, be a Jew in your house, do whatever you want, be like everybody else. So therefore, the Greeks wanted the Jews to be part of their education system, go to their gymnasiums, right? Go to the Colosseum, see people eaten by animals, right? Sounds like roller derby, right? Sounds like all kinds of interesting sporting events, whatever it is. Entertainment, worship of the body, right? All these different things. So that is 10 times worse. Because when the Jews got to America, what did they do? They threw their tefillin overboard. They didn't want religious persecution. They didn't want to have anything to do with religion. So what did they do for their kids? They gave them a half-baked Jewish education, if that. right? So they did it to themselves. No one put a gun to their head. So that's the cardiac Jew. The cardiac Jew says, I still want to have some connection to Judaism. I want to have some connection. I like the candles. Maybe I'm a Passover Seder. No matter how watered down it is, they want to have some sort of connection, right? So it doesn't matter if the intermarriage is skyrocketing. Doesn't matter if they can't pass it down. Doesn't matter if they're intermarried, 60% intermarriage. That doesn't matter. That's exactly what the Greeks want. The more you're like us, the more you're going to assimilate. So all these people like Hanukkah candles, and I'm not a big proponent of the fact that, if you do something, even at a minimal level, could lead you to do more. Because I used to think better do nothing, right? I still pretty much think that, because if you do something that's a travesty of a mockery of a sham, it doesn't mean anything, right? So now you got all these people, right? You got all these people. Let's say they're going to make a Hanukkah party. They're going to make a family Hanukkah party. And let's say almost half the people, or a significant amount, are non-Jews. So now you're going to light the candles. Maybe someone will make a blessing. They're going to light the candles. They're going to say, thank God you commanded me to light the candle. They'll say, thank God, we're going to remember this miracle, right? We're going to remember the miracle you did in previous times. But you're like a Greek. You're intermarried, right? If you're intermarried and you're doing this, how silly is that? Now I'm going to say, come on, that's your Judaism and you're a fanatic. And what are they saying? We want to have some part in Judaism. Yeah, someone told me last week, okay, so what do? They have a big party because it's intermarried. They have a big party, December 24th. It's going to be a little bit less this year. It'll be outside. I don't know. Someone told me people are doing things outside now, propane gas, even though it's like, it's like 0 degrees, 0 degrees Celsius, or below, it's like, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, they're going to be outside, freezing their kishkes off. They'll be dressed like they're going to a football game or whatever. They're going to dress really warm. They're going to have, gas heaters, and they'll be able to, it'll be far away. People, be outside. So it won't be as bad. But I said, what are people going to do? They want to socialize, right? So I said, I get, okay, I get it. But I said more guts than brain. It's 0 degrees. What are you doing outside freezing, right? People do it for sports. I get it. But okay, they want to socialize. So I don't want to, belittle the point. I just want to make clear that people say, oh, you don't think it's any good. You think it's it's a waste of time. Yes, it's a waste of time. What do you kids learn from this? Nothing. So you light these candles. They don't understand what it means. You don't understand what it means. All these non-Jews don't understand what it means. So what are you doing? So no, but you're a fanatic and we want to feel part of Judaism. Doesn't make sense. Right? It doesn't make logical sense. Right? Because what you're doing is saying Judaism is really not that important. I'm just making, I just want to feel good. I want to feel good about my Judaism. Okay. I definitely understand. But if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things, is that level of Judaism were these type of people, let's say, these type of Greeks, because that's what they are. These type of Greeks, if they had a choice, and someone came to put a gun to their head and said, bow down to this guy in the stick, right? A reference to JC, or the short little fat guy. They'll say, hey, bow down to Fatso, Mr. Buddha himself. They probably won't call him Fatso. They'll have a little more respect. But they'll say, bow down or die. What are they going to do? They're going to bow. You know why? Because they don't care. They're going to say, big deal. I'll bow to him even if I don't believe in him. Right? If you're a Jew, there's an obligation to forfeit your life. And if you don't, you transgress the Torah prohibition. Doesn't apply to a non-Jew, right? I spoke about this on Tanakh Talk 2 weeks ago. 100% does not apply to a non-Jew. And if they would give up their life, that could be suicide.
Right,
certainly for a non-Jew.
Yeah, you brought that out.
Now, so someone will say, so let me be a cardiac Jew. But what's the end result? The end result is a disaster, right? It's an absolute disaster. So you're saying, okay, let's be like the Greeks. I want to be like the Greeks. Isn't that the opposite of what God wants? That's the opposite. And they were willing to give up their life. When they saw this pig on the altar, the Hasmoneans saw the pig on the altar, they said, okay, that's enough. So imagine So imagine you got these Kohanim. They don't know anything about war, right? These ragtag yeshiva students fighting against the world power, right? Now, at that time, the Greeks, right? So imagine we'll make a big distinction here. Imagine the Vatican. You have no idea what firepower they may have. Regardless, let's say the Vatican decides we're going to revolt against America, right? They're going to fight against, the world power. What do you think is going to happen to them? Yeah, blown to smithereens, unless they have nuclear weapons, which no one's telling us, right? So now, if I understand that, why isn't that suicide, right? The question some of the commentaries ask, right? By these Kohanim, they could have forfeited their life. They could have died, right? But since they believed 100%, and they were doing it for the sake of heaven, that God's going to help them, that's not called suicide, right? That wouldn't have been called suicide. So without digressing here, the non-Jews, 100%, there's nothing to talk about. Non-Jews have an agenda, right? The politicians, everyone will agree. Everyone will agree they have an agenda. Now, Jews, if they're in power, can also have an agenda. And if they're not Torah observant, their agenda goes against Torah. But now it gets a little more complicated. Now it gets a little more controversial. Why? Because that's why there are certain rabbinical authorities that hold in the state of Israel today, this is where it's going to get controversial, it's better not to participate in the government. In other words, you got the people in power who many will consider the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, people in power that all they want to do is uproot Judaism. You're going to say, how do you know? How do you know? Because go back and read Theodore Herzl's book. He wrote a book called The Jewish State, right? In that book, it has nothing to do with Torah. He would have been happy with Uganda. He would have been happy with Argentina. See, I'd be speaking Spanish now if I lived there. Probably have more
right,
students.
you were there. Yeah.
Regardless, it wasn't about what the Torah said. It was about having the state of Jews. He would have been happy anywhere, right? Not, and obviously, you don't want to offend people by saying the Jewish land, i.e. the land of Israel, belongs to the Jews, right? God forbid anyone should make that statement, right? We don't want to offend anybody. So there are rabbinical authorities that will hold it's better not to participate in the government. The whole purpose of the government in general, in the whole state of Israel, except for religious people, is to uproot Torah. That's their goal. Right, Rabbi Chaim Coffman, Shem Yikam Damo, God should avenge his blood, was famous student of the Rabbi Chaim, and he writes in his epic book, Epics of the Messiah, talks about the coming of the Messiah, and he basically says that if there are Jews in Israel, that their goal is to uproot Torah, then there's no mitzvah to live there. Better to live somewhere else than actually to live there. So now, why is this so severe? Why are there people that would hold that to live in Israel is a mitzvah to live there, right? But you shouldn't have anything to do with the government. Shouldn't take money from the government. Shouldn't vote in elections and all that. See, I told you it was going to get controversial. Why did they hold against it? Why did they hold against it? So one very simple reason. Let's say you have religious parties, right? You have religious parties that, are part of the government, usually a right-wing government. They won't be part of left-wing government normally, right? So over here, what's the problem? The problem is that there are many times that there will be desecration of Shabbos. Mm-hmm. Meaning they, for a long time they've been building this railroad connecting, Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, other parts or whatever, and building this line. And they've claimed it's pikuach nefesh, right? It's like saving a life. We're obligated to break Shabbos to do it. Now, that's obviously not true, right? It's definitely not true. They can work 6 days a week, 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter. 1 day a week's not going to make that much of a difference. They may claim it does. Irrelevant. It's not in the same category whatsoever of saving lives, right? So now, if you have religious members of the Knesset, part of a religious party, and they know, and everybody knows because they made protests against it, everybody knows they're building on Shabbos, right? They're building these trains, the railroads, whatever, the tracks, whatever they're doing it on Shabbos. Now, if you are part of that government, so you're saying that's okay. Now you're going to say, listen, if a person's part of the government, what's the big deal? They're not giving their giving their check and say, that's fine, whatever, but they're in the government, right? What could they do? What could they do? They say, listen, we want a status quo. We don't want things, done on Shabbos, etc. Right? That's part of the state, right? It's part of what goes on here. Some places don't adhere to it, whatever the case is. Sometimes they'll get fined, sometimes not. In this case, or any other case, if they're sitting if they're sitting in the government, and the government allows this to go on, right? It's not like, the people themselves are in charge. Obviously, there are laws, right? If there are laws that say you can't do this, the government's overriding it. Government's saying it's okay. So regardless, you're part of the government. Now, if you're a part of the government, what are you saying? You're saying, I agree. You're saying, I agree to this. Now, the religious parties will say, we don't agree. For sure, we don't agree. We're not into desecration of Shabbos. Okay, so then you should leave the government, right? In other words, they're going to do certain things egregiously, and they're going to do it right in front of your face, and you're not going to say anything. In my language, because I grew up in Massachusetts, in my language, I say, what are you guys, a bunch of wusses? You're a bunch of wusses. Why aren't you standing up to the government?
Tea Party.
Why aren't you standing up to the government? What is it, about money? Because you're getting money, and it's for your institutions, right? Or you guys a bunch of wusses. You're afraid to stand up for Torah. So there are deals are made. Rather have this happen than other things happen. Okay, so what's the other side going to argue, right? We'll give them, I'm in a generous mood, not like the Supreme Court or other courts. They know we're not going to listen to this. I'll listen to the other side. What does the other side say? And this is the majority, right? We'll just point this out. This is the majority. They're going to say it's better to be part of a government because they can try and offset terrible decrees made against Torah. In other words, if the other side, the leftists, they have their way, go to Tel Aviv, go to Tiberias, go to other places you wouldn't recognize as being a holy place, right? If you go, let's say, to Tel Aviv, walk around Tel Aviv for a while, and then take the bus, train, or drive, whatever, go to Jerusalem, major difference. Mm-hmm. You're going to feel a difference. Go to Tel Aviv, no difference than downtown Miami. No difference than downtown Calgary, any of these places, right? You don't see the holiness there, even if people speak Hebrew, right? As many will claim it's the gay capital of the world, unfortunately, right? Hundreds of thousands of them live there. Okay, right? But if they had their way, they would make things 10 times worse here. It would just be a Jewish state in name. Just a lot of Jews have nothing to do with Judaism. There'll be the cardiac Jews, right? They wanted to establish Sabbath as a holy day. They wanted to have, a day off, so to speak. But obviously not the way we want, even though they claimed that, they don't want people to work and they shut things down, etc. So the other side,
the whole purpose, yeah.
So the other side will say, and again, the other side is the majority, right? I'm not going to say not. The other side is definitely the majority. And they'll say better to be part of a government to offset the terrible decrees they make. Because if you weren't part of the government, they just do all kinds of things against Torah mitzvahs. I'm not saying they would say it's forbidden to keep Torah mitzvahs, but what would stop them from saying Saturday's a regular day? And therefore, what could people in business do? Keep all their places open. And if you won't work on Shabbos, same thing happened in America. They'll say, find another job. What would stop them from doing that? But there are laws on the books. Can't do that. That's discrimination, right? So they have Shabbos as a holy day. Very good, right? But if it wouldn't be for the religious people, it wouldn't be. They want to make Israel like anywhere else. And when you make Israel like anywhere else, then what's going to happen? The place is not going to survive. The only reason beyond the shadow of a doubt why the Jewish people have existed in the land of Israel, over the last 70 years, right? Because you got all these other rogue states, rogue countries, totally want to destroy the Jewish people. So many people said, why weren't they able to do it? And why were we successful in the 6-Day War? Etc. Because of the Israeli army, right? And also we have nuclear weapons. Don't tell anyone. We also got nuclear weapons. That was before nuclear weapons. So to say it was the mighty Israeli army, and all these things, we caught them off guard, and we counter-strike. We did all these things, and unbelievable. We're able to push these other nations away. So there have been a lot of mess ups heard on the radio, and other sources, with the army, Air Force, other things where, the army's not as mighty as we may think. They may think, oh, we did this, we did that, we did the other thing, right? As the verse in Deuteronomy says, Kol chotzim v'yadi yasu et ha'chayil hazeh, it's the strength of my hands, etc. But Israel lives l'ma'ala min hateva. They live above nature. When they live above nature, this nation, God forbid, should never exist here. You got 20 states, 20 Arab states want to destroy it. Much bigger population. Much bigger population. So you're going to say, so how are they still here? Right? How in the world are we still here? So you have to watch my video on proof of God's existence, through the, and how the Jewish people survived the Romans, survived the Greeks, survived the Egyptians, Babylonians. After the Babylonians, right, by the destruction of the Second Temple, we shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. That should have been it. But with the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, and now the fact you got all these pogroms, you had a Holocaust, and you got the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And if you look just in the last 70 years, what's going on without getting into politics or anything else, with everything that's gone on, the Jewish people have survived miraculously. Miraculously.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And you go back to, Kissinger during the 6-Day War, right? Jew himself, secular as he may be, right? He didn't want to give extra arms to Jewish people. Would have died without it. They wouldn't have survived, right? This for sure wouldn't have survived, right? But how have we survived this long? How in the world have we survived this long? There's only one reason. Torah, right? Prayer. You want to say it's the might of the army? I could bring you proof after proof, mess ups with the army, right? So I'm not saying you don't need a standing army, right? Even time of King David, you had a standing army. And when there was a milchemes mitzvah, there was an obligatory war. Everybody went to fight. Everybody went to fight. So now there's a major deterrence. What's the major deterrent? The major deterrent is nuclear weapons, right? And the fact that, we have power in the Middle East, etc. And, no one's going to want to, mess with the Jewish people unless, obviously they do it in mass, right? But they look kind of silly against Hamas. This ragtag bunch of people fighting behind UN buildings and other things, and different things made the army look bad. I mean, many years ago, God forbid, there were all these attacks on buses, and years ago there were, they blew up buses. There were certain things that, according to nature, can't stop. Right? If these Arabs have the ability to work in Israel, they have a legal permit. Right? What's to stop them from getting on a bus and hacking people before they die? Right? Because they think they're going to get 70 virgins in the next world. So I asked the question, what do the women get? They get 70 men? I don't know. Good question. But regardless, how is that possible to stop? In general, I'm not giving them any ideas. Right? But how in the world, logically, and this is what people were afraid of. People at that time were riding buses with like irons, with what do you call it, rolling pins. Some guy makes a video and goes, yeah, if anyone attacks me, I got my Louisville Slugger, right? You got a baseball bat, anyone doesn't know. That's what a Louisville Slugger is. He said, yeah, someone's stabbing you, your Louisville Slugger is not going to help that much, is it? But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it stopped. These attacks stopped. Now, the army will say, we did it, right? We saw people coming in. We did this. We did that. But God wanted to stop. Because in general, if they sent hundreds of people a day, all different directions, right? North, south, central, right? Central Israel. What is to stop them from getting on buses and attacking people? God forbid, very little. And you don't even know who they are because they're legal to work, right? If they're legal to work, I mean, if they had half a brain, and they wanted to really cripple the country, very easy to do. And it's almost impossible to stop unless you don't allow them in. Now, the UN will get involved in this. Other countries get involved in this. It's apartheid. You can't do that. It's forbidden, right? But the reality is, unless you do that, how would you stop it, right? There's no possible way to stop it. So the other side, as we mentioned, will say, you have to be part of this government. If you're not part of the government, it'll be 10 times worse. Now, I would say in general, that is probably true. Because if not, and, just like leaving the leftists in power with no checks and balances, they'll do all kinds of things. Who knows? America might be a communist country soon. You just never know. You never know what's going to be.
Socialist,
yeah. Yeah, God forbid you don't have a Republican win one of these runoffs in Georgia. They're going to have free reign. They're going to have free reign. It's a very scary thing, especially these allegations coming out of China, right? Regardless of that, what we have over here is a scary thing, because if they're doing things that are illegal, and Israel has like 40 different parties, we're going to another elections because, they made an emergency coalition and basically fell by the wayside. So going to another election, I think in March, whatever it is. So people say you got to vote. You don't have a choice to vote, right? Someone argued with me many years ago. This is before I had a right to vote. Argued with me many years ago. He says, yeah, but all the Gedolim, all the great rabbinical authorities said you have to vote. This one and that one. And I said, let me ask you. I said, these great rabbinical authorities, you hold by everything they say? I said, or you pick and choose. So I said, I also have a great rabbinical authority I listen to. And if he tells me not to vote, I don't vote. Right? I don't pick and choose. I take his stringencies with his leniencies. Now, this is a very big rabbi that I said this to. He said, okay, point taken. Check, mate. So I said, if you're going to pick and choose, pick and choose. Right? But don't tell me, I hold like this and this, I hold like this and that. Forget it. If you hold like him all across the board, good. Right? But the argument is we have no choice. Right? That's what most people will say. But there's the flip side. The flip side is you have a hand in their desecration. If they're desecrating Shabbos and doing other things, there are times, they've dug up bones. They've dug up bones and paved them over, want to put up shopping malls. There was protests about that, right? All kinds of different things. Sometimes you got to stand up. Sometimes you got to say something, right? Sometimes you got to protest, even though there are rabbinical authorities will say that's not the way. That's not the way to do things, etc. But there are many great rabbinical authorities said, I don't want it on my shoulders. If I had an opportunity to protest, even if nothing's going to happen, even if nothing's going to change, right? Sometimes you're in the palace of the king. You keep your mouth shut. That's bad news. So someone came after me. Rabbi gave class once and asked him, there's going to be one of these parades, right? A gay parade. And it was going right by the yeshiva. So he said, what should we do? He goes, well, I don't think you should be handing out candies, right? I would have said Tootsie Pops, Tootsie Rolls. Remember Tootsie Rolls, right? So I wouldn't be handing out Tootsie Rolls, my language. He goes, you got to be out there and protest. He goes, you don't confront, but out there you should be saying Tehillim, should be saying Psalms, learn out there, but show there's something wrong. Why? Because if you're living in the palace of the king, and this is something so egregious, right? Some of the commentaries say, by what happened in Sodom. Why did God knock off Sodom? Okay, Sodom was pretty bad. And if you let that go on, the world wouldn't be able to survive. That's also true. But the main reason is because they were in God's backyard. And God says, I've had enough. Right? God says, I've absolutely had enough. Right? And therefore, at the end of the day, God said, I can't take it anymore. It's in my backyard. So if you let something like that go, and you don't say anything, it's like you agree. Now, I asked my Rebbe this question many years ago, that they protested against all these non-Jewish Russians coming into Israel. Now, the vast majority, more than 1 million Russians that came. Now, this is something easily proven. The vast majority of Russians that came here aren't Jewish. They're not Jewish. They all had like the same descendant grandmother that was Jewish, but she got paid off. She got paid off very well, right? But a lot of them are not. So I asked my Rebbe point blank. I said, really? I said, you really think this did something? He said, I want to tell you a story. He said, who was in charge of the Interior Ministry at that time? The Interior Ministry at that time, and today as well, was in charge of religious Jews. Now, religious Jews knew this, and they looked the other way. So what's the fear? A lot of these Russians hate Torah. They're not interested in Torah at all. So they're certainly going to side with the leftists, and the leftists said, we're going to bring them in. We don't care because we want to offset the ultra-Orthodox. Yeah, I heard this in my own ears on the radio. So these non-Jews, you got many of these non-Jews going to fight against you Orthodox Jews in the country itself. So you're setting up a recipe for disaster. So, but I asked him, I said, okay, very good. I said, but, one other thing he mentioned. Now, he didn't exactly tell me the connection, but he did say the reason we have problems with the Arabs today is because of that. It's because of all these non-Jewish Russians coming in. Now, he didn't tell me exactly what the connection was, right? But he said that's the reason. That's the reason I have a problem with the Arabs today. And this was many years ago, more than 20 years ago. So on that, I asked, okay, but do you think it did anything? Now, he has from his rabbis who told him that doesn't matter if it doesn't do anything. Because if you get upstairs, you don't want God to say, hey, where were you? How come you didn't protest? Right? How come you didn't protest against it? Now, there are great rabbis that'll say that's not the way, right? Because you're going to antagonize people, other things. But if it's in the palace of the king, the repercussions could be tenfold. Now, if you make a gay parade in downtown Miami, is that a problem? Also a problem, right? It's also something God doesn't want. No matter Jews there, not Jews there, it's still forbidden, right, to act in this. Non-Jews, right? Book of Leviticus chapter 18, right? It says you're not allowed, you're not allowed to have, to be a homosexual. You're not allowed to do bestiality, and all that, or be a lesbian, all that. We'll keep it PG-13 because that's what we'll do, right? But that's for non-Jews also, right? There are forbidden relationships by non-Jews, right? Certainly as well. Now, is that a bad thing to happen in America? 100%. Or it happens anywhere, right? It's a tremendously bad thing. But what about if it's in the land of Israel? If it's in the land of Israel, you're in God's backyard. And you're Jews. I'm not even saying you're non-Jews. For argument's sake, there are all these Jews acting this way. You're in God's backyard. It was shortly thereafter, a few years ago, there was a gay parade here. And a few weeks later, forget the time frame, there was a shoot up in Miami of a gay bar, right, of a gay place or whatever, in Miami. It was shortly thereafter. It wasn't like the next day, right? But it was shortly thereafter, right? That's a wake up call. That did not happen by osmosis. They could have picked any bar. They could have picked any dance place to shoot up. Why specifically that place? Because it's a coincidence, maybe. But if you wouldn't have had this event happen before, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe. Man, say, oh, come on, you can't prove that. You're right, I can't prove it. But there is no such thing as a coincidence, right? If it would have happened in, I don't know, in some yacht place on the water, right? No one's going to make the connection, right? So you can say, fine, there's no connection. But the fact that it happened in the same type of place, right, and that type of place, could say it's a connection. But the point, again, the point is that even if you want to say that's not the way to do things and we're not into protest and all that, in the palace of the king, as if you're saying it's okay. And when you say it's okay and you don't care, the repercussions could be absolutely catastrophic. We'll take it one step further. I mean, I don't want to get into politics too much. Take it one step further, right? You take someone like Mr. Ehud Barak, right? He's trying to make a comeback now, big-time leftist, right, as most people probably know. And he wanted to make a deal with Arafat, right? He rot wherever he is. He wanted to make a deal with Arafat, give 90% of the West Bank. Now, if you give back 95% of the West Bank, that's the heart of Israel, right? It was hard to defend. That's why they took it over. You know, that's exactly why they took it over, because on four directions they could have got, you had the Lebanese, and you had Jordan, you had Egypt, you had other places, other people. It's very hard to defend, right? So he was willing to give Arafat 95%. This idiot, right? Thank God Arafat was even stupider, and he said no, it's 100% or nothing. So that was it. They had no opportunity. Thank God they didn't take it, right? But if you had the leftists in charge, what are they going to do? They don't have to put us at war. They can just give all the land back. If they, God forbid, they give all the land back, which has never happened. I'm a student of history. Never happened in the history of man that a nation fought a defensive war, had to give land back. There was in the 70s, you may remember, there was in the 70s a transfer of people from India to Pakistan and vice versa. That's it, right? And, anyone who's ever fought a defensive war would to give land back. They're claiming they want to go back to the 67, and they want all the refugees. How many refugees are you talking about? Millions. They want millions of Arabs to come from Transjordan, from Syria, from other places, in order to come back and reclaim their land. That's insanity. But that's where they want to start. Thank God there's no one to talk to. Right? That's why this whole thing has never gotten anywhere, over the last number of years. There's no one to talk to. But if the leftists had their way, they give everything away, right? There's a medrash, my Rebbe once told me, it's a medrash in Psalms that says that the whole thing about the end of days and what's going to be, and it's going to be a war and all this, there's a medrash that says that when the Messiah comes, Jews aren't going to be here. Jews are not going to be in the land of Israel. Where are they going to be? They're going to be in the desert, right? And the Messiah is going to bring them from the desert into the land. Now, you want to tell me 6.5, 7 million Jews, nuclear weapons, right? Shh, don't tell anyone, right? Jonathan Pollard might spill the beans, right? So nuclear weapons and all that, do I really think all these other nations are going to take them over? No, right? According to what we see on the ground, that's almost an impossibility. Now, that being said, how could it be, right? If we take it literally, how could we be in the desert? Either we're taken over forcefully, right? God forbid you have all these countries come together, or some superpower knocks everybody out. They end up in the desert. Let's say we take it literally. Or what I'd say is probably more probable is, if God forbid, and I don't see it happening in the near future, is that you got a left-wing government, major left-wing government, they hand the land over. Now, if they hand that land over, that is a recipe for disaster. That I could see all of a sudden. Now you have all these other nations come in. They're on four sides. How are you going to fight in four directions? They have a hard enough time. God forbid, you got Hamas in the south and you got Hezbollah in the north. And if they get caught on both sides, if there was a major war, they're in trouble. Not that I'm advocating, what should be. But if they got knocked around on both sides, they're not, they don't have tons of people. They don't have tons of people over here, right? So that could create havoc, absolutely havoc. So what the leftists could do, if there's nobody to check them, is that they could uproot Torah. They uproot Torah to the extent that they destroy their own state. They destroy themselves. But they wouldn't care because they don't have anything to do with Torah, right? So therefore, the fact that there's any Torah in the land of Israel is absolutely miraculous, right? And many people think, the founders of the state, they're all secular Jews. Not true, because a lot of the students of the Vilna Gaon came here, draining the swamps, dying of malaria, right? There are plenty of religious Jews that came here, right? I think they were flabbergasted, seeing what the leftists wanted to do here. But, regardless, if they had their way, they would want to make Israel like any other place. Now, in order to do that, you desecrate Shabbos, desecrate the festivals, you desecrate all things, you make same-sex marriage, God forbid, legal. right? You do that. That's the Medrash says, just as a side point. The Medrash says any country, not just the land of Israel, any country that sanctions same-sex marriages, right? In other words, they put a marriage document. They make it legal, like Mr. Obama, right? Made it legal for all states. That's okay. So the Medrash says that country or that place will cease to exist. Now, the only question is when, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. The Medrash doesn't give a timeline.
No.
Medrash does not give a timeline, but that means that like all morality's gone out the window. And then God says, what do I need these people for? What do I need this place for? Right? How did Rome essentially get destroyed? Get taken over by the Huns, right? So to speak. How'd they get taken over? They got taken over very simply because they were decadent. They didn't have the fight above them. They were lazy. They grew up, fat from the land and all that, and they got destroyed from within.
Wow.
So you can't, certainly the Jewish people cannot live on their coattails, right? Every day is a new day. Every day is about serving God the right way, right? Especially during Hanukkah, about the miracles, the light, Torah, right? Wisdom, not Greek wisdom, right? Torah wisdom. You be like the Greeks, you'll destroy. You will absolutely destroy the Jewish people. And that's what we see today. 90% of American Jewry destroyed, right? No different in South America, no difference in Canada, no difference anywhere else. The numbers speak for themselves. So therefore, if there are no checks and balances, and people will say, come on, that's fanatic. How could you go against the state of Israel? You know how corrupt these people are? In general, the Vilna Gaon says that in order for the Messiah to come, the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. Who's the mixed multitude today? So he brings down in his book, Evan Shlema, that he says that the mixed multitude are secular Jews in charge of all kinds of different organizations, or God forbid, governments, etc. Says the Vilna Gaon. Vilna Gaon says that the Jewish people, that the Messiah cannot come unless these people are eradicated. Meaning not that we should kill them, but meaning that they have to disappear. They have to disappear. Now, one of the signs that we're living in the Messianic era is the fact that the governments have gone to heresy. We see that here. We see that. We see that everywhere. We see that. We see that in all places.
Especially with COVID and funding.
Not only that, you see it by corruption.
Right.
There's just so much corruption. I mean, stuff coming out every day, connections to China. What's on that computer? Come on, we all want to see. Bring down so many different people. And especially it's just, amazing. Anyone's following and whatever the Supreme Court says and others say is affidavit after affidavit. It's just, it's mind boggling. You want to say it's a conspiracy theory, whatever. There's corruption all over. Right. And seemingly, I don't think it's getting better here. Heads will roll. I don't know if people going to jail or not. We'll see. Right. But you see by the government itself, not just in the States, see in Israel, see in Italy. I mean, I think between Israel and Italy and Japan, I think those are probably the three biggest, most corrupt governments since World War II. Right? Not necessarily in that order. Japan, nothing to talk about. Italy, just go through Italian history, the corruption there. Right? So what do we see?
Murdered the Caesars. Yeah.
Right? What do we see? We see over here that, at least, we've been speaking about, the state of Israel, we'll speak about other places also, but, I wanted people to say, people wave the flag and say, oh, the state of Israel this, state of Israel that. There are a lot of issues here. That people think that, like in the States, people overstepping their boundaries or legislatures or Supreme Courts, like the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania just uprooted what the legislature, wanted to do. when it came to the election, no problem with, with ballots. It doesn't matter the date, doesn't matter verifying signatures. They went against the Constitution. Constitution says you have to do it with the state legislature, right? You do that goes against the Constitution. So people jumping up and down, that goes against the Constitution. So I started to laugh when I saw this. Why? Because they do it all the time here in Israel. The Supreme Court puts its nose in places where it doesn't belong. They're rabid anti-Semites, i.e. anti-Torah. Very, very much anti-Torah. You're going to say, wow, that's a radical statement. No, it's not. Because if you know what goes on here, and you've seen what goes on here, they stick their big fat nose knowing nothing about Judaism. If you would give the Supreme Court justice, you give them a Rambam, right? And you say, here's the Rambam in Hebrew. Tell me what it says. They can't tell you what it says, right? They wouldn't be able to put it together, right? It's in Hebrew. It's in Hebrew because they're ignorant. They don't know, right? But they stick their noses when it comes to, to religion. They're the biggest know-it-alls in the world, and like we know nothing. So the Supreme Court certainly many, many times overstepped their boundaries, way overstepped their boundaries in many ways. Now they have no right. People were complaining what happened in Pennsylvania. Come on, it's nothing. There's absolutely zero compared to what's going on over here. How in the world, I'll just ask this question because I really don't want to get into politics, but how in the world, if you have these voting machines, right? And people say they've been rigged and this and that. So they want forensic evidence. So Attorney General in Michigan says, we're not giving over the machines. You don't have a right to see the machines. So what are you hiding? What in the world are you hiding? They just want to see. They're going to manipulate the machines. They're going to do it. Let them see. If you have nothing to hide, show the machine. Right? So what are they trying to hide? No, they don't have a right. They don't have this. Reject this. Reject that. If they have evidence, right? And there's corruption at the highest level, in a lot of different ways. I mean, not like I said, not to go into that, but over here, over here to see what the Supreme Court has done, over the years, it's incredulous. Say, separation, church and state. What do they have a right to interfere into Judaism? They have no right. They have absolutely, zero right to interfere. It's out of their jurisdiction. 100% out of their jurisdiction, but doesn't stop them. Yeah, question.
Because you're talking about a couple of different sides here and the antagonism that goes on between, especially, lefts and rights. And, I jumped in and I weighed in, maybe playing the devil's advocate, I hate to say, in a post the other day. And I said, can I ask, when does scrutiny cross the line to false accusation? And you see this like filibusters all the time in politics. They're called filibusters. They literally do nothing but go against the opposition. And if they're not with their side, they literally go against. And I understand how social psychologists call that maladaptive behavior, that outgroup derogation, where they got these two-party systems. All they do is act derogatory towards the other. That's just what filibusters do. But I try to ask myself, because it's a pet peeve of mine, when people are not just scrutinizing, because, there's an honesty to scrutinizing, like you're saying. True. We need to see the truth. We need to get to let us see the machines. Right. There's an honesty there. But when is it overbearing to the point, of actually becoming a false accusation? Because I know a lot of people walk around today finger pointing.
I'll give you an example from modern history.
Okay.
Right? Go back, again, not necessarily want to get into politics, but go back when Trump was a candidate.
Right.
And they tried to nail him with Russian collusion. They had zero. Zero.
Nothing.
They had no information, but they just wanted to malign him.
Right.
100%. They wanted to malign him. And in the end, what did they come up with? They found out who was behind it. Miss Hillary Clinton, of all people. Right? She was behind it. Now, without getting into all that, and they wanted, they had no information. Everything said, we're going to prove this, we're going to prove that, we're going to prove the other thing. Zero. Didn't have anything. And it played out for 4 years. Didn't have anything, right? So what are they trying to do? Destroy someone's reputation.
I know.
Right?
But
Why they
false accusation's a bad thing.
False accusation. Right now, they're claiming this, against what Giuliani's doing, but they have affidavits, for goodness sakes. These people didn't have anything. They got, mathematician experts. They got affidavits. They got people who saw things with their own eyes. And they're brushing it away like nothing happened. Absolutely zero happened, right? They can show in real time. And actually, I saw this. I was watching the election results come in, right? That in Pennsylvania, Trump lost votes. They were showing like different states, and they showed his state he had a certain number of votes, and then like 5 minutes later, you saw he lost 30,000 votes. Now, I'm going to ask you in real time, how can that happen? You're going to say it's a computer glitch? Clerical error?
It should never go down, yeah.
It never go down.
Adding doesn't go backwards.
Right. It's either going to go up a little bit. It may go up a lot. It's never going to go down. Oh, that's just circumstantial evidence. Right. But if you're doing it to malign someone, obviously that's against the Torah. Right. That's called motzi shemer. That's libel. You could have sued them for libel, probably. Right. But they dogged him and dogged him and dogged him.
Oh, yeah.
And they had no evidence. They had zero evidence. Now, so if you want to say, not to get into politics here, if you want to say.
Well, I'm glad we're not getting into politics.
That people can accuse, and they have information to accuse, and they're going to bring people down and all that, that's one thing. Right. But if they're doing it just to go against the other side, and if they're doing it just to show that we want to make the other side look bad, but they really have no real allegations.
It's maladaptive.
That's called motzi shemer. That is called giving someone else a bad name. That's called libel. Right? That for sure is called libel. If they, if they're investigating and, they're investigating wrongdoing, right. They have a right to do that. If they come up with nothing, okay. Right? They come up with nothing.
Lay it down, yeah.
If they actually have information, they can bring people down, because we know there is corruption, and corruption cannot be tolerated. Like they just brought down this congressman who had ties to China with a spy, and he was on a committee for security, for goodness sakes, and he got had, and he totally got had. He's whatever. His heads are rolling now. That's okay. That they got serious information. And Biden's son, I think they got serious information. These aren't just accusations, right? What's going to happen with it? Okay. But they're not allowed to investigate. If they're investigating, they have nothing. And all they want to do, let's just make clear, and all they want to do is destroy someone's reputation, just to go against the other side. That 100% is forbidden. That 100% is forbidden. If they think they have accusations and they're looking into it, and they actually have accusations, let the chips fall where they may, right? That is a legitimate way. That is a legitimate way. But if someone has information and they look the other way and say, no, it's not really information, you have to prove it. Show why it's not information. But don't say like these cowards are saying, we're not looking into this. You don't have a case. We're not looking into this.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I understand why.
Sink like
because
lead.
If they actually find out it's true and they have to overthrow the whole election, there's going to be chaos in America. Right? And if they don't do that, and the allegations seem to be true, let's say, then the whole system's a fraud. And if the whole system's a fraud, then, all these non-Jews are all liable for a death penalty. What happened to judgment over here?
Wow.
Right? What happened to law courts? What do we see over here? They're corrupt. It'd be one thing if they heard the information. It'd be one thing that, they hear the accusation. But here, what do they say? Most of them, we're not dealing with this. You're the wrong jurisdiction. We're not dealing with it. Everyone keeps pushing, it's like pass the buck. We're not dealing with this. Not going to deal with that. But they didn't hear the case. So what do you do with 100 affidavits? Say, no, it doesn't mean anything. Totally irrelevant. So what do we see? Even though you got Republicans in the Supreme Court, corrupt, right? But I do understand. I'll cut them some slack because they're going to have a real chip on their shoulder to deal with this. Because if they deal with it, and the conclusion goes the way it probably should, then what's going to be is going to be absolute chaos. The left will burn down every city in America. That's the result. But if you don't do that, they're too afraid, which probably is the case in general. But if that would be the case, what are you going to have? So now you're going to have a fraudulent system. No one's ever going to want to vote because the whole thing is fraud. And if you do that now, you're going to say, okay, forget about politics. We've had politics up the gazoo, and all this. I get it. The idea is there are law courts for a reason. And if these law courts do not uphold what the Constitution says and does not uphold integrity, then the whole republic's going to get flushed down the toilet. You just heard it right here. Live. They are going to get flushed. That's what's going to happen. That's the repercussion if you're a non-Jew over here and you have that kind of power, right? Then that's a pretty serious thing. So if you want to tell me, okay, we're going to look into the allegations and we're going to see, no, this doesn't apply. No, this isn't true. No, this isn't true. Okay, let's see them knock off certain allegations. But if you have hundreds of affidavits of eyewitnesses, they're not just making this up, eyewitnesses. Right? Go back and watch, the 14-hour hearing in Michigan. They had hundreds of eyewitnesses, not to mention the mathematicians and all that. So what are you going to say? They're all lying? All of them? They signed affidavits, perjury. They could go to jail. Absolutely go to jail. Now, I'm not a conspiracist in general. But when you have that kind of information and nobody's doing diddly squat about it, there's a tremendous amount of suppression, right, of the news coming out, and the whole thing is a fraud. And if that happens now let's look at the bigger picture. So what's God saying over here? Oh, you got all these things going on. You know what? I want to destroy America from within. This will do it. This will do it because even if they don't overturn it, right? So you have half the people that say this whole thing was a fraud. They're disenfranchised, right? And the other half that says, we don't care. We won. Right? So it doesn't matter. But what does that do about integrity? Right. They're going to have to change the system, how people vote. But there's a bigger issue. The bigger issue is, what's the deal with law courts? Law courts are supposed to be law abiding. They're not supposed to let this stuff happen. And everyone and their mother's coming out and saying, where's the justice? Where in the world is the justice? So we'll make it, relevant even the times of the Bible, right? You go back to what happened in Shechem, with Hamor, with Shechem and Hamor. Shechem takes Dinah, right? Dinah goes out, he takes her against her will. The entire population, right? Their entire population gets wiped off the face of the map. They get killed. Commentaries ask why they get killed. How in the world do they get killed? Right? The commentaries answer, they transgressed the Noahide laws, setting up law courts. What do you mean setting up law courts? What could they have done? Everybody knew. Everybody knew what this guy did. Complicit. Right? Now, what this guy did, he's liable for a death penalty. Mm-hmm. And everybody was like the monkey, right? See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. It comes along the Torah and says the entire population deserves to die. So you're going to say, wow, that is unbelievable, fanatical. Wait a minute. They all knew. It doesn't matter if he's the head of state or not. Impeach him. Take him out and say, you did this. It's over. Right? Because everybody knew. And when you know, we spoke about this before, you're guilty by association. Being guilty by association is as if you did the thing itself. So therefore, you don't uphold what the law courts are. And what the law courts are supposed to do, you're liable for the death penalty because that's obvious. Now, if you don't uphold, now again, so that happened way back when. We see it in front of our own eyes. Now, people are going to say, oh, you've been brainwashed, you're watching too much. See, it could very well be. But I'm saying, what's the end result? The end result could be that even if nothing changes, and no one's going to jail, and that quote unquote nothing can be proven, that means that the whole system was a fraud. That means that how is anyone going to take voting seriously now? Because there were egregious things in many places. People agree. Just maybe not enough to turn it over and this, whatever. Doesn't matter. right? It doesn't matter. That will end in destruction, right? That is current events 101. That is what could happen, right? Now, the other way, it can also be bad. The other way, if it would get turned over, the leftists will burn down every city, and it'll be absolute chaos the other way.
Yeah, defund
So
the
the
police.
the lesser of two evils. What's the lesser of two evils? Let this be fraud. Maybe get rid of the machines. Maybe do everything has to be, here you don't have an issue in Israel. Why? First of all, there are no machines, and you have to go by your identity card, and it has to be you. So maybe there will be a little bit of fraud, but you're not gonna have like numbers like this, right? Because you have to go by name and by face. That's it. You have to do it in person. No such thing as, bringing these ballots in, COVID or no COVID, right? That's what you do, right? So if it goes by identity, your identity card, where's the fraud? No fraud. There won't be any fraud. That's the only way to do it. Forget about these other ballots. No way to do it. That's the only way to do it, to ensure integrity. But if you don't have integrity, when it comes to law courts, and when it comes to the law of the land, and anyone who, did something, illegal, in voting, if you had somebody who wasn't a family member put ballots in a voting box, you go to jail. It's a misdemeanor, right? But it doesn't get enforced, right? So what happened to law courts? They should be prosecuting tens of thousands of people.
Super stretchy rubber laws.
But according to this, if you go by the no-hide laws, they're dead. All these people are liable for the death penalty because they go against the law of the land. They go against something that's obvious, right? If it's a law of the land that you cannot commit fraud, and all these things when it comes to voting, and obviously it should be obvious. It's not something like, oh, I didn't think about it. I didn't know this was illegal. I didn't know I couldn't put 50 ballots that weren't mine in a box that I had no connection to. Gee, I didn't know that. That's a misdemeanor. That's a felony. Now, any non-Jew who's involved in this, we're making it as practical as possible. I don't have to warn them. I can take my gun and shoot them. They're all liable for the death penalty because they're going against what the law says. And they have to uphold what the law says, right? The law of the land. And again, this is something that would make sense logically. Because if you would allow people to do this, what's going to happen? There's no integrity. There's going to be fraud. If there's going to be fraud, then how can you ever know that someone got elected properly? That brings down the entire place. That's what the repercussions are. Same thing what happened in Sodom, right? Well, what were people doing? They would steal the amount that a person couldn't get prosecuted for, right? A very small amount. Someone else would steal the same amount. Right. Someone else would steal amount, so they stole everything.
Nothing left
from the person. And if you have that type of stealing, then society cannot exist. And that's why God wiped them out. But they transgressed other things. They transgressed immorality. They transgressed idolatry. They transgressed, murder. Those are the big three a Jew has to give up their life for. But what was their seal? How did they die? Right? Why were they supposed to die? Why were they condemned to death? Let's say better. Because of stealing, right? It's like the flood, right? I spoke about your thing on the flood. Why? Because the world that place cannot exist if that goes on. And if everyone's going to steal a little bit that you can't get nailed in a law court for, then what's going to happen? You have the society cannot function. And people say, okay, voting's not the same thing as stealing, and it's a political position and it's all that, that's all true, right? It's going to bring down the country. This is integrity. This is what the place is built on. And if it cannot withstand that, the place is going to destroy itself. That's what's going to happen. Because if they're not going to prosecute fraud, then the more a person does it or has the ability to do it, as long as someone's not, as long as it's not close, it's not going to matter. But if it is close, you'll see what happened here, right? No difference. And there will be no integrity. But this is going on for years. It's not like it doesn't exist, right? Everyone will admit it's been going on places, totally corrupt for the last 20 years more. I don't think there's any question, but it really didn't matter. It only mattered twice, right? And this election in the year 2000. The only elections that it mattered because it was so close. But you need integrity in a land to exist. You need integrity in law courts, right, in order to exist. If you don't have integrity in law courts and they're bots, or, they don't want to take responsibility, or whatever the case is, right, just like what happened in Shechem, everyone looked the other way. Nobody did anything about it. Then what happens? They're all accomplices. They're all accomplices. Now, this, we're not talking about low man on the totem pole over here. We're talking about the higher ups, right? And the higher ups are making the laws, and they're doing all this that, goes against what's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that means it's corrupt from the top. If it's corrupt from the top, then the place will destroy itself, because you have at least, a good part of the population knows that they're corrupt, et cetera, but they can't do anything, right? So you see all these other rogue countries. What do? They have uprisings, right? Military coups and all this because of corruption, because of other things, right? Now, America's not going to do that because they're a republic. They're an absolute republic. Now, if this would be any other place, let's understand over here. If this would be any other place, what would they do? Military would come in. That's it. They declare martial law. That's what they would do. They uncover all the fraud. People would be killed, probably, or exiled, or whatever. And whoever was supposed to win would win, or whoever they want to put in power. Right? That's not going to happen. Right? That's got its own issues. Right? But the idea is, if the law courts are corrupt and the higher ups are corrupt, and all that, then the whole system, just like what happened to the Romans, the whole system gets destroyed from within. Now, again, am I going to predict this is going to happen? It could. It very well could. Because they're not going to overturn this. That's the way it looks. Right? It'll be an absolute miracle if they do. And there'll be certain repercussions that way. But if they don't, and they allow this to go on, then that place is in serious, serious trouble. Either the places where the corruption was, or the place in general. And what that means, it'll get worse. And the worse it gets, they're just going to eat themselves up. And they'll destroy themselves from within. Yeah. Right? So, I do apologize going more into detail about, current events. Regardless of which side a person's on, a person has to realize what the Torah is going to say over here. Right? And, and the way it looks. Right? So when we look, back to our topic here, when we look at the land of Israel, you're either on one side or the other. Right? Either you're on the side where Israel wants to make themselves like any other nation. And that's going to, and certainly that's going to be bad. So therefore, you got religious Jews that are part of the government. So they can stop that. They can try and offset it. Good. Right? But the other side will say, that's not true. That if there are bad things going on, and there's, egregious desecration of Shabbos and other things, you cannot have any connection to it because it's as if you did it yourself. So that's pretty severe. Now, again, the majority don't hold like that. The majority say it's better to be, to have some checks and balances, than be in the opposition. Right? But the other side will say it's better to be in the opposition, then at least I'm not stained. Right? My soul doesn't get stained through this. Now, that's one explanation. Another explanation is that, what do we say? We say, beware of rulers, for they befriend someone only for their own benefit. Right? But, so what does that mean? If it's not in their benefit, what can they do? Rulers, if they have a certain level of power, they can cause a person to lose their property. They can cause people, they can take their rights away. They can say, well, we have an obligation to do this for whatever reason, and we're going to take away what's most precious to you. So you would really call that dictatorship.
Yep. Right?
But they, certain places, they could just change laws. Like, like I heard in China, like, a person's got, built a business, or they have a fancy apartment or whatever it is. The government says, well, we're tearing down this business. We're tearing down, this building because we're going to build, I don't know, whatever. On this, you got 48 hours to get out. Now, that's happened. Now, that's happened probably more than once, right? So, therefore, they have power to do whatever they want. And if they want to, they can take away your property and you have no say, right? So, that's more, I would say, that's more not like a democracy, right? That's more like a dictatorship. But they could but this explanation is that rulers can take away person's property, right? They can take their rights away. Here in Israel, to give an example, I had a student that was coming from the Philippines and wanted to make Aliyah, wanted to come live here. He was married to a Filipino. He was Jewish, first cousin of Barbara Streisand to boot, right? That's real pedigree. Right, and he was Hare Krishna for like 35 years, like real type Hare Krishna, not just giving out flowers at the airport, right? So he wanted to become an Orthodox Jew. His wife wants to convert. He had stuff on Facebook. The Ministry of the Interior, not religious Jews by any stretch, didn't want him to come. They forbade him from coming. Why? Because they were afraid he's going to missionize, right? Now, real missionaries, they let come here a dime a dozen. This guy wants to be religious. Wife wants to convert. They're not interested. So we got someone to fight his case, the Supreme Court. And whatever, he got here, he fought it, and he was able to come here. Now, the Ministry of Interior, they call the shots, someone who wants to make Aliyah. Obviously they're going to check into your background, make sure you don't have a criminal background, other things, but they're the ones who make they're the ones who call the shots. But this person was on the up and up. Wanted to only come to the land of Israel, and all that, live as an Orthodox Jew, because live in the, in the middle of nowhere, right, in the Philippines, and they didn't want to have any part of him. And he got a lawyer to fight it, and he was allowed to go the whole thing with conditions and coming and whatever. It was a whole thing. But the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court took it to like another level. And they're like, what is this, mafia? They say, what, you decide who comes and who doesn't. If they're Jewish, let them come. But again, missionaries come like a dime a dozen. You want to be more religious and not interested. I mean, it's not the first case has happened. But, they were afraid he's going to missionize. So what could they do? We have the right to say yay or nay. We have the power. And we're saying you're not a good candidate to come here. And whatever, thank God the person came here, and they're coming here. But
miscarriages can happen.
Yeah. So
accidental miscarriage.
Say again.
An accidental miscarriage, is different than what you're talking about. Is when a whole. Yeah. All right. Just totally
accidental. But they claim they had good reason to do it. Politician. This lawyer said you didn't have good jurisdiction to do it. You had no right to do it. And the Supreme Court ruled with them, but. Whatever, they had certain conditions they had to fulfill, and it wasn't so easy, but they were able to, finally come in. Now, when it comes to politicians, also, that you don't know what their true thoughts are, right? Because at the end of the day, a politician is a politician. If it benefits them, they're not going to have compassion for a poor person. Until that person's been destroyed. Now you're going to say, why would they do that? Because it's not in their interest. Right? In other words, if they don't care, they don't care. But a politician, there are other issues. We'll speak about blemishes in a second. There are definitely other issues, but we have to remember, a politician is a politician. And therefore, a politician, most people probably understand whether they're Jewish, religious, or not, they can be had. They can take bribes, right? They can do other things that go against Torah. So therefore, whether they're religious or not, a politician's a politician, right? And they're doing things based on any number of things, right? So the Mishnah speaks, when the Mishnah says, beware of rulers, the Mishnah speaks about blemishes in rulers, right? That they're going to have to brown nose, in my language, they're going to have to brown nose to their constituents to remain in power. So what are they doing? They're going according to what the people want to hear, most likely. And they themselves will become corrupted. I'm not saying everybody, but they themselves will become corrupted, in order to remain in power. And they will not stay on the straight and narrow path. So the Mishnah here brings up this idea of a of a blemish, right? Of a blemish over here in politicians. And the blemish itself will be that they are beholden to other people. When they're beholden to other people, they may change their mind like they, as quickly as they change a shirt, so to speak. They'll go according to what people want to hear. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's good, right? But so that's one idea that they're certainly blemished. Another thing is love and hatred of the rulers is not in their hand. Now you're going to say, wow, why is it not in their hand, right? So it's not in their hand, as the Torah tells me. It's not in their hand. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 10 tells me the heart of a king is in the hand of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in their hand.
Like a river, yeah.
Because everything is in the hands of God. That means that if a ruler wants to draw someone close when they need them, or, I don't know, whatever reason, God wants to put them in certain situations. So he puts an idea in their head. It may not make sense. It may not make sense rationally, but God may put an idea in their head. By putting an idea in their head, people will say, come on, it's their idea. They decided to go on this path, but the reality is God's turning the screws a little bit, right? God put it in their mind. Now you're going to tell me, well, don't they have free will? Don't they have their own thoughts, what they want to do, what they want to accomplish? People say, come on, that's not God. That's the person.
He directs, doesn't he?
That's the person. So the truth is, they don't have the power to do good or bad except what God wants them to do. So the reality is God is orchestrating everything, right? Even what they think. You're going to say, well, where's their free will? They have free will. We're not saying they don't have free will, but they're being moved in certain directions. What's the proof? Very interesting proof over here.
So many.
What's the proof? We see proof from none other than the last generation. We see what happened in Germany, right? We see what happened in Germany, that they gave lots of benefits to the Jews living there. Why did they give them all kinds of benefits? So they can enjoy the fruits of their labor. They worked hard. They fought in their wars, right? So they gave them tremendous benefits. Comes along Hitler, Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, right? May his name be blotted out, may he rot. He comes to power. And what does he do? He persuades the masses that it was beneficial to steal from the Jews, run after them, and murder them. Now, when you look at the rise of the Third Reich, you look at the rise of the Third Reich. Now, Hitler said clear what he was going to do. People might have thought he was a madman. He wasn't going to get in power. All these things. But he said clear. He said clear in Mein Kampf, right? Exactly what he was going to do. Now, most people may not be aware. What is it's a rabid anti-Semitic work. Nothing to talk about. Pretty amazing. Translated in a lot of different languages. Go figure. But what was it based on? Right. We're going to mention two things here. First of all, it's based on the 95 Theses of none other than Mr. Martin Luther. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, anyone who knows anything about Martin Luther, big time anti-Semite, right? Rabid anti-Semite. Where did Hitler get a lot of his stuff from? From him. Now, when the Third Reich, started recruiting people and, working on getting power, who were the people that signed up? Right? Before he got to power. Right? We're not talking when he got to power. When he was, before that. Who were the first people to sign up? First people to sign up were the academics. the doctors, lawyers. Now, he didn't put a gun to anybody's head over here, right? But they willfully joined knowing what he was going to do. So these aren't the skinheads of today, right? We're talking the cream of the crop of society. So you're going to say, wow, he's very charismatic. Look what an unbelievable speaker he was. Let's say he was, right? Maybe it's like Billy Graham, right? Also, unbelievable speaker. Thousands of people, fill up stadiums. Beautiful, right? But the guy was a crackpot, right? Hitler was a crackpot, right? Even though he was a crackpot, they were convinced this was the right thing to do, right? In other words, he didn't put a gun to their head, right? You can read the book from the chair of Harvard University. I don't know if he's still the chair. It's called Hitler's Willing Executioners, about a 600-page book, right? All about the fact that Hitler did not put guns to people's heads in order to do what he did, right? They came running. They believed all the propaganda, that it was permissible because the Jews caused all the problems. And therefore, it not only was permissible, it was a mitzvah to steal from them, run after them, and brutally murder them. Now, if you want to tell me they're what Germany was, America became later, they were the cream of the crop in intelligentsia at that time. That's who the German people were, right? They weren't dummies. They weren't dummies by any stretch. So now you got the cream of the crop of society that believed beyond the shadow of a doubt. I don't care how charismatic Hitler was, right? They believed beyond the shadow of a doubt the people to blame for this were Jews, for all the economic woes, everything else, and they believed 100% that it was permissible to treat Jews in a certain way, and it was better to treat a dog. It was better to treat a dog properly, than to treat a Jew. Now, if you would ask the $1 million question, how could people that intelligent? I don't care how charismatic someone is. How can someone justify extinguishing a human race? Right? Or exterminating a group,
any
right? A group of people.
For that matter.
How could they justify mass genocide? Right? What's the simple answer? The simple answer is that intelligence, just like Socrates and Aristotle, we spoke about them, that your own understanding can only go a certain way. In other words, we have finite understanding. Having finite understanding, if you don't have a moral code, then that finite understanding can mislead you.
Oh, yeah.
It can mislead you to the point where if someone says this is black, you say, what do you mean it's white? You could be convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt it's white. But what it shows over here, one aspect of it is that intelligence can only take you so far. Right? In other words, if you don't have a moral code,
sure.
Intelligence can not only limit you, but it can make you do certain things that, in general you would never do. There was an experiment. I remember I took a course. It was a social science course, and we saw a film, or like whatever, the video about how far somebody would go, at the expense of someone else. Right?
This
is
like
an
the
experiment.
Stockholm
What did
syndrome?
They do? That if the person didn't get the right answer, they would push a button, and the other person would get an electric shock.
Okay.
And you'd hear the other person say, "Oh," but it was a placebo. The other person, wasn't getting the shock, but they wanted to see how far somebody would take that.
I actually,
right?
Yeah,
So they give him
I'm
another
familiar with it.
So what happened? They ask another question, the guy gets it wrong. And they give him a second shock. And he's like in a lot of pain. And they ask him a third question, and he gets it wrong. Now, this person's already having doubts. If I push this button, this guy's gonna get juiced over here. Right? But they showed consistently that the more juice they gave, even though they had this conflict, they still kept going. Right? To the point where they gave so much quote unquote juice, the guy didn't respond. Because they thought they basically killed him. Almost.
Heart attack or something.
Yeah, heart attack, whatever. But they showed, with the people that did this, they kept going and they didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they understood, what
they were
what
doing
exactly,
something painful,
what exactly
harmful.
they're doing. And then, at the end where they say, okay, you can stop, this, we're just doing an experiment. The person's really alive on the other side and they meet and whatever. It's like a whole thing, right? But it shows how far somebody's willing to go. Now, did this person really understand maybe this is a moral conflict? Yes, probably after like the second or third time where the guy's like screaming in pain, right? After quote unquote, he gets zapped, right? But it didn't stop him. In other words, the person kept going. Not everybody did, right? But a lot of people did. Why? Because of listening to instruction. They wanted to show how far a person's willing to go listening to instruction, at the expense of, what they could possibly do to someone else. Now, I wouldn't say any of these people by any stretch were Rhodes Scholars. Some of them might have been, right? But they still, I don't believe, and this is just me, I don't believe any of them had more than 150 IQ, right? I definitely don't believe that. But okay. But if you're telling me the intelligentsia, the greatest thinkers of that time, lawyers, doctors, academics, they're the worst. Right? They're the worst. No offense to anyone who's in academia, but they're all a bunch of frauds also. But we're not even going to get into that. Right? So you got, these academics and all that. They don't have a moral code. They have zero moral code. So if they can be convinced by this lunatic, by this crackpot in my language, what does that say? Right? It says, well, they're easily persuaded. No. It says that intelligence can only take you so far. In other words, why didn't they think? Why is it Jews deserve this treatment where I'm going to treat my dog better? Why does that make sense logically? Doesn't make sense. It totally doesn't make sense, but they believe with a full heart they were the cause. And they deserve to have mass genocide on them. Gypsies, cripples, people not going to succeed in society or be a burden to society. The bottom line here is people can be convinced of anything, even if it doesn't make any sense. They're not saying we're not willing to look at the information. They're saying this information is true. They're saying we believe it, right? So there's no moral code. So if there's no moral code, that means anything goes. Now, someone will say, come on, how far do you take that? Aren't there people that have a moral code? Some do, but they can justify all kinds of things. If you were to ask people, right, I did this one of my Tanakh talks that we spoke about proof of God's existence. Where do you see that in all times, in all places, murder is going to be forbidden? Right? So I took it from a psychological standpoint, right? From a moral aspect. And there were 9 different scenarios. I think 10, 9 or 10. I go back and watch it over there. There were 9 or 10 scenarios, moral scenarios, right, that knocked it off. Each one either was only at that time, right, only applied at this time, not at another time, only applied to this country, not to another. Okay, but the question came back, when does it stop? Why did it apply here and not apply there? And who gave them the right to do it? I mean, there are a lot of questions. So at the end, the possible answer was the fact that maybe God said it's forbidden in all cases. Right? That I went through 9, I knocked every single one of them off, these moral issues. Right? But people will say, one of the things is people will say, well, you're right. Murder should be forbidden, but what about in the case, there's always a but. What about in the case of euthanasia? The person's dying anyway. They're suffering, right? So we call that mercy killing. But that's mercy. But why is it mercy? Right? We hold that if a Jew or non-Jew does it, that's murder. Right? If that is murder, that's a total prohibition. For a non-Jew, you're liable for death penalty. But what will they do? They'll justify it. They'll justify it in this case. Or they'll justify it in this case. Right? But the justification morally doesn't get off the ground. Why? Because what you're saying is, I have a right to do this, but why now? What about in this case? What about in that case? Can we say that murder universally is forbidden? Universally, all generations, all times, no exceptions. And the answer is no. You can only see it when God says it's forbidden. That's it. Because every other thing has you can squirm out of it. There are ways, there are problems. There are major issues. In other words, you'll say, well, it applies here, but it doesn't apply there. So how do you know? How do you know it only applies over there? Right? Maybe it's only when someone's in power. What if they're not in power? I mean, there are a lot of questions. Right? There are a lot of questions. So here, the masses of intelligentsia believe beyond the shadow of a doubt this was a positive command in the Torah to wipe out the Jewish people. Right? No moral code, no nothing, just defined by saying they caused this, they deserved it. Now, if you're telling me there are a bunch of, it's a mafia, there are a bunch of hoodlums, right? They subscribe to Antifa, let's say, right? They're part of that mob, okay? So these people are not the brightest people in the world. So it makes sense. They'll be anti-Semites, they'll be anti-white, they'll be anti all kinds of things, maybe, right? So that I could hear. But if you're telling me this is the cream of the crop, when it comes to intelligence, that doesn't make sense. And it only makes sense because that kind of knowledge only takes you so far. That knowledge is never going to make you a moral individual. What's the proof? What's the greatest proof? Mr. Aristotle himself. Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers in the history of man. Nobody doubts. Right? It might have been a heretic, but it doesn't matter. One of the greatest philosophers of all time. Aristotle was also known as a big-time womanizer. Big-time womanizer.
Hypocrite, yeah.
Total hypocrite. And his students caught him in the act. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, what do you mean? There's Aristotle, the philosopher, the genius. And there's Aristotle does everything else. Now, obviously, the Torah doesn't say that. Torah says that's forbidden. You cannot compartmentalize. You can't say, well, I'm going to do these terrible things, and I'll still do whatever. Doesn't work, right? Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, etc. But intelligence, the point here is intelligence does not make you moral. I heard a great rabbi once say, I'd love to send my kids to university. Forget about the price. I'd send them to university if I would see they would come out more moral than they went in.
Right.
As I heard Ravigdor Miller once say, Ravigdor Miller, one of the Torah giants of the last generation of blessed memory, said, yeah, you can learn a lot of things in university. Says like narcotics. Where you take up two major things, booze and women. Right? So, this is what goes on. People get quote unquote an education also. We bashed education before. Regardless, that's what the Greeks brought in as well. Regardless, where does education take you? Where do these things take you? If you're telling me they make you a more moral person, we'll have a discussion, right? But I don't think that's the case, right? Definitely don't believe that's the case. You'll go down morally, many times more than you're going to go up spiritually, right? You have to work like a dog to keep that, you have to work like a dog to keep that up. So, so over here, it's a pretty blatant thing. Yeah, we can be convinced of all kinds of things, and what happens? Our intelligence goes out the window because we have biases. A person can have a 250 IQ. A person can believe have all this knowledge and refuse to look at evidence in front of their face. Evidence for God, evidence, for Torah, important things why? Because they have a bias. And if they have a bias, their eyes are shut. Like, I've heard many times, people won't even get in discussion. What does it mean to be good? Right? I don't need all this. I don't need to discuss about the Torah, about the Bible, about this, because, I'm good and, this has no relevance to my life. Okay, first of all, we can hack that and say, what's your definition of good? But I bet I could probably show what it means to your life. Now, I'm not, out of mind, out of sight. Well, that's not an argument. That's not showing the Torah is true or not. What that is showing is I don't want to hear it. I got 200 affidavits showing there was fraud in a certain county. I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to hear it because I hate Trump. So I'm not going to hear it. Same thing. No difference. You're going to say, well, come on. It's totally different and blah, blah. Why won't they hear evidence? Why in the world won't they hear evidence? If they got nothing to hide. They say, no, it doesn't apply. No, we can't do this. No. Okay. So, maybe the problem's the Constitution, maybe the problem's in this, problem's that. What are they afraid to hand over a machine to check? What are they afraid of? You got nothing to hide. You got nothing to hide. Hand it over. Let's see. Give us a certain amount of time just to look at it. Give us 1 day to look at it. Nope, we're not going to do it. We're going to put an injunction. Now, what does that tell you logically? That tells you they got something to hide. That's what it tells you, right? But if they're not willing to look at evidence, and this is evidence about anything, right? But it fits in with Torah, right? It fits in with belief in God, right? Someone once told me, I was working once a week. I volunteered to learn with a student at Hebrew University, right? They one day a week they would learn for an hour, with volunteers about Torah. So this guy tells me, if you prove the Torah 99%, I have 1% free will. This is like 25 years ago. Yeah, it's a long time ago. And I said, but that doesn't really make sense. I said, because if you have 99% proof, he said, well, I don't want to be brainwashed. I have 1%, I could say it's not true. But again, if you know something 99%, 1% doesn't matter. But I said, okay, so let me ask you the following question. I had to write a lot of term papers in college, in university, right? Because I was a history major. So how do you write a term paper? Very easy. You take a thesis, is what a guy tells me. You take a thesis, you have the body of it trying to prove it, and you make a conclusion. I said, great. I said, now, what happens in the middle of your proving? You have doubts. You have doubts about some of the proofs. And then you leave your conclusion in doubt. You say, well, I prove like this, I prove like that, I'm not really sure. He said, oh, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, because if I do that, I'm going to fail. The professor's going to give me an F. I said, oh, very good. Why? I said, why is he going to give you an F? So he said, it's very simple. He said, I left it in doubt, right? I didn't prove it across the board. I left it in doubt, right? So I said, okay, now let's talk about life. You're telling me I have 99% proof, right? 99% proof. I put that in the body of my thesis. I conclude 99% proof. Right? You're going to tell me I still have 1%? If you put that in your conclusion, well, I have 99% proof, but I have 1% doubt. Right? What's your professor going to say? He's going to go, blah, 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 blah. I said, what are you, an idiot? That's what he's going to say. He's going to say you have 99% proof. Where's the doubt? The doubt doesn't go anywhere. Right? You have to prove it. Right? So his answer was, well, I could still have a doubt. I said, you have free will. Right? But at the end of the day, you have to evaluate evidence.
Right.
But you have to evaluate it in an honest way. Now, people who are going to say, and whatever, it doesn't really matter. But, I mean, this is crucial when it comes to Judaism. If they're going to say, I'm not interested in evaluating evidence, and they're claiming to be open-minded, it's over. Because they're going to say, I believe what I believe. Okay, I have 4 sources, 10 sources against you that show what you're saying is nothing. What you're saying is not true. They're going to say, it doesn't matter. I hold what I hold. I don't hold of your sources. Why don't you hold of my sources? I don't believe in oral law. The rabbis made this up and all this. Okay, they have to watch all my videos on oral law, right? But, they can make all kinds of claims, but they're not answering the question. Right. And, people claim I'm closed-minded and all this, which is true to a certain extent, but they won't answer simple questions. Right. I got somebody who will not even get in a discussion. He'll just say, this is fanatical. This is it. It doesn't relate to me. Okay. I could probably make it relate to you. But if I make it relate to this person who's intermarried, what's going to happen? It's going to destroy his life.
Right.
Right. Because now he's going to realize his life's a travesty of a mockery of a sham. Right, which someone once told me more than 30 years ago, if I look into Judaism, was a Jew, said if I look into Judaism and I see it's true, and if I find out it's true, then I have to change my life. And he said, I'm not willing to do that. That person is intellectually honest. Most people are just blowing smoke. They're saying, oh, I can't believe that. You really think this is what the Torah means? You really think you're going to get long life in the next world? You take a mother bird away from the eggs? That's such an act of cruelty, God forbid. I mean, obviously heresy if you say that. Do you really believe that? Yeah. It also says if I honor parents, I also get a long life. But okay, let's go back to the mother bird, right? What's the case of the mother bird? It's a decree. Just like kashrus. Why am I allowed not to eat pig? Because the Torah said so. Torah doesn't give me a reason. It says don't eat it. Torah says don't eat, a certain type of rabbit. But it's only going to have one of the kosher signs. Either it's going to chew its cud, right? Either it chews its cud, or it's got split hooves. But there are only a handful of exceptions. So what do you think? Moshe Rabbeinu's Dr. Doolittle? And he can talk with the animals. Come on. There are thousands and thousands of animals out there. Moshe Rabbeinu, where did he live? He lived in Egypt, right? He lived outside of Egypt. He didn't get to the promised land. He didn't go everywhere. How could he have known that? Possible proof that actually God exists, because he's not going to know these exceptions. Mm-hmm. And not only that, if you find another exception that only has one thing and not the other, either a split hoof or chews its God, then Torah can't be true. God forbid, right? It disproves it. Just like in all other so-called religions. Very easy to poke holes in Christianity. Very easy to poke holes in Islam. Very easy. There are mistakes all over the place, right? That's not the purpose for now. The idea is, where is the integrity? Right. Where's the intellectual honesty? People make these statements. This is, the Torah is against women. All these feminists. Well, I can show you it's not. I can show you the Jewish people were saved in Egypt. Why? Because of the women. Who didn't give in to the sin of the golden calf? The women. Well, Abraham's told by God himself, listen to Sarah when she says, kick out Yishmael. He doesn't want to, because she's bigger than you in prophecy. Boy, those are three things that don't discriminate against women. And say, if it wasn't for the women, we wouldn't be here. Yeah, but I want to be able to lead services. I want to be able to do it. That's not the question. You're claiming the Torah is anti-women. So, okay, so now you have to understand the specific cases why women can't do this or can't do that. Right? But that's not an answer. Just by saying, well, I'm a feminist and I believe in this, that is no connection at all, because you're not looking to what it says. If you're telling me I'm looking at what it says, it's one thing. Then we can have a discussion. But if you're going to not, you said, this isn't my worldview. Okay, I don't care if it's your worldview. Is it true? Is it true or not? A lot of things might not be my worldview. But if the Torah says I have to do it, right? I have to eat 3 donuts a day, on Hanukkah. Okay, so I'll put on a little bit of weight. Got to work out a little bit. Whatever it is, Torah tells me I have to do it. I have to do it, right? I have to understand. I do the best of my ability to understand. But if most of it's a divine decree, if all of it's, I shouldn't say most of it, it's all a divine decree. If it's all a divine decree, does not necessarily mean I'm going to fathom it at the nth level. Right? King Solomon, the wisest of all men, he had a little bit difficult with the red heifer. The red heifer, you take this cow that's totally red, never worked, never had, no one ever sat on it, whatever, you burnt it up, someone became impure, you take the ashes, Kohen takes the ashes, puts it on the person, he becomes pure, the Kohen becomes impure at the same time. A lot of sense doesn't make. It's contradiction in terms. If it makes this person pure, how can it make the Kohen impure? It's the basic idea of a chok. A chok means it's a law that doesn't make sense, right? Take the laws of kashrus. I can't mix milk and meat, right? Milk is permissible if it's kosher. Meat is permissible if it's kosher. If I put them together with heat, it becomes forbidden. That doesn't make sense. Why does that make sense logically? Doesn't make sense, right? But the Torah says it doesn't matter. You still have to keep it. There are things that do make sense. There are things that make sense, but there are all kinds of, subsets and different things that, even though it does make sense, other things within that get asked the question. But it doesn't matter. I still have to keep it, right? It's irrelevant. I still have to keep it. So you got people who say, oh, you're so close-minded and you're such a fanatic or whatever. Okay, so let's have a debate. Let's have a discussion. Now, I'm not going to get into discussion with you. You're a fanatic. Answer my questions. Answer to me where intermarriage is forbidden. Is permissible. Explain to me from any source you want why it's okay, not just because I think it's okay. I don't care what you think. I'm interested, is it true?
Mm-hmm.
But you see, we live in a very leftist society. People do not want to be inconvenienced. One of my videos I made on Torah Portion of the Week a few weeks ago. People do not want to be inconvenienced. Right? And therefore, it's not in their world outlook. Why would I even think such a thing? But here we're talking about people who have, big brains, and these people are brilliant and they refuse to look at information. Or they're convinced of certain things based on, I don't want to say based on whatever they think. And you could take the most intelligent people and you could turn them into butchers. Right? That's the proof over here. Comes along the Brisker Rav. Rav Yisrael Zev Soloveitchik, a blessed memory, one of the Torah giants of the last generation, mentioned this Mishnah. He quoted this Mishnah when speaking about the government in the land of Israel, which we spoke about, where the ultra-Orthodox Jews made an agreement to join the government. Why they make an agreement? Yeah, they'll say we wanted to keep the secularists in check, but they also did it for benefits. Benefits that they're going to get. Now, it could benefit yeshivas. It could benefit girls' schools. The benefits are real. We're not saying not. So they're doing it for the benefits as well. Now, what happens when the government does not need them anymore? Just like, right-wing government, if they don't need the Orthodox parties, they'll make all kinds of decrees against them. Right? They'll do the whole thing with the army, forcing yeshiva students to go in the army. They'll make all kinds of decrees that will go against
their existence.
That will go against the people that they want to be with. So therefore, when they make decrees, what are they showing? They're showing the true colors. Now, so everyone will agree, whoever's in charge in Israel, whether it's the right or the left, they're both bad. We sort of align more with the right because, they're more in tune with our needs, in general. But they're both bad. They're certainly both bad. But the bottom line is, when they don't need you, they will spit you out in a nasty way. Right. And what happens? What happens after that? The religious parties still keep coming back. They still keep coming back because, again, it's better, to have checks and balances than not. Even though they understand they could get spit out. Because why would they do that? They would do that because it's a greater benefit. There's a bigger picture. When you see a bigger picture, they'll claim, okay, the ends justify the means. But says the Brisker Rav, not true. Not true at all. And they'll spit you out whenever they want to. They'll make your life a misery when they feel it's necessary. And they'll show their true colors. And when they show their true colors, what are you complaining about? Right? People say, I can't believe this. I know people, let's say the modern Orthodox religious Zionist movement, many years ago, would vote for a certain party that was like a leftist party. And then they got sold out in different ways. So, people went up in arms and protests. And then what are you protesting? You voted for a group that's part of the government. That's a leftist group. So, what in the world are you complaining about? You got sold out, but you voted for the wrong group. And even, quote unquote, you voted for the right group. Right? A person has to remember when Ariel Sharon was in power, where did they put him? A lot of times they put him in different places before he became the prime minister. One of the places they put him is in home development. Right? Home development. So what did he do? He built out in the West Bank. Built out like tens of thousands of houses in the West Bank. And he put people out there to live, government benefits, all this. And then he sold them down the river. And then eventually he sold them down the river. So comes along the Satmar Rebbe, blessed memory of Yoel Teitelbaum, once said after the 6-Day War, when they gave back the Western Wall, so to say, they gave back the Temple Mount to the to the Arabs. God forbid they should be disenfranchised. So the Satmar Rebbe said, the same group that are big-time Zionists that took the land, he said they're going to be the ones to give it back. He said this at the height of the Zionists. There aren't too many Zionists except for the cab drivers. I'm not exactly sure why cab drivers are so Zionistic. There aren't so many Zionists left, at least ideologically. So he made that claim. Now, again, mentioned Ariel Sharon. So he put people all over the place. Put people in the South, right? He put people in the South in Gush Katif. And what did he do? He took them out. He got rid of them, right? For the sake, quote unquote, of peace. There were protests and this, and, there were still people that, they threw out of their homes, etc. They were still paying mortgages in homes they didn't own. The whole disaster, an absolute disaster. But they took over 7,500 families and knocked them out.
Wow.
Right? And moved them. Now, you're talking about someone, if you haven't read his autobiography, which I did, right? So I'm not saying I'm bragging over here, but if you read his autobiography, Warrior, and what he did as a general and how he fought against the Arabs, what happened over here? How in the world, if he put these people, he was such a right-wing hawk, and he put all these people out there, right, into different places, how could he knock them out? For peace, for politics. What happened? All of a sudden, he became more moderate. Read his autobiography, right? He was one of the most right-wing hawks you have. And he sold out his own people for, quote unquote, for peace. And that's what he did. Shortly thereafter, what happened? He had a stroke and he was in a coma for 8 years and he died. Right? Now, is that measure for measure? Could have done other things that were 10 times worse. Right? But okay. That's what he's willing to do. So over here, what does the Mishnah say? So the Mishnah says that they can act friendly when it befits them or benefits them, right? But they don't stand by someone in their time of need. Politicians can do whatever they want because if it benefits them now, they'll do it. If it doesn't benefit them, okay, maybe they will, maybe they won't, or they'll spit people out because they don't care. So there was a whole outcry of what happened by Gush Katif. And these people, the livelihood's thrown out. They had nowhere to live. They didn't give them any place to live. This went on for years. People still paying, a mortgage on a place that's demolished. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. So what do we see clear? We see clear that politicians do exactly what they want. Whether they're here, whether they're anywhere else, if it benefits them and they screw other people, that's what they do, right? And it doesn't matter. And and this goes on all the time, right? Some places are more corrupt, some places, less corrupt. But in the end, is there such a thing as a quote unquote a religious politician? They get tainted. One of the reasons they get tainted is because they sit with people that are heretics. I'm talking about here in Israel. Outside the land, just as bad. Just as bad. So how can you say, unless you work really hard not to let it affect you and you're immersed in Torah and other things, even if you're involved, in politics, how does a person like that stay clean? Stay squeaky clean? Very, very hard. By someone who doesn't have an anchor, impossible. Right? I'm going to go on record because I know you're taping this. Right? I'm going to go on record and say there is no such thing as a straight politician. That's never taken a bribe. That's never done anything wrong. That's morally wrong, etc. Because it's next to
black and white.
Impossible. It is next to impossible to stay on the straight and narrow path. And we see that because unfortunately there are scandals all the time. And, so again, people say, listen, it's better that you have quote unquote religious politicians, whether here in Israel or, elsewhere. So they'll have more of a say. So non-Jews can't make decrees and different things, etc. Okay. I'm not saying I don't hear that, but the problem is, how does a person like that stay squeaky clean? And I'm not just talking about politics. There are other things also, right? But when it comes to politics is just a dirty business. It's just, rubbing people the right way to get what you want. And that's, you mentioned before, filibusters. All these things, that's exactly what it is. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You look the other way for this, I'll look the other way for this. A lot of things. A lot of underhanded things go on, and a lot of things we don't hear about. They get brushed under the table. What we're hearing about now, goes to the top of the pyramid over here. How far it goes, we're going to see. But this whole thing with China is not, this is not a simple thing at all. And, if you see, I can understand someone who, let's say leaves the presidency and they make tons of money. Clinton made millions speaking, got a foundation, whatever, made millions, right? All these people, Obama's made a lot of money, etc. Okay, they're entitled. Not to, people want to make money. They're certainly entitled to charge a lot of money to speak or whatever, but you got other people that, have made money illegally, in different ways. And their net worth went up exponentially. And I have to ask the question, if they're in power, right? That's the question on, Mr. Biden that made tons of money, while he's in power. If he's not in power, I can hear. He's got deals with other people, whatever, fine. If he's in power, how's he making so much money? So you can say, well, maybe he got some side investments, maybe this, I don't know. They're just at the, I don't think I'm saying anything that no one knows, right? However, it's going to be proven. It is proven, it's not proven. There's a lot of corruption, right?
Oh,
Him, others. There's just a ton. There's a ton out there, but you don't want to see the republic go down because of corruption. and that's what you see. That's what you possibly could see. Yeah, question.
Well, just on the other side, the flip side, the corruption, as bad as it is, we see so much in the social media or in the media today, where it's always downplayed and swept under the carpet, and even the sway that has on the lulling of the mind of the masses. Now I know that you went to university in New York and you're from the East Coast. I couldn't help it, and this just was a blip from my past. I actually watched last week's Saturday Night Live. Are you familiar with the show in New York?
Yeah.
And they did entire spoofs on, Giuliani and the whole scenario this week and exactly everything you're talking about. But this is, I love the good comedy, and I couldn't help but chuckle at a few things. But when you talk about this today, it throws it all in perspective. It just how much of this dirt ball can we pour under the carpet and cover it over, and nobody noticed the lump?
They have a job. Their job, quote unquote, is like to destroy other people. Their job really is to give over the news, be investigative, get quote unquote the truth and what's going on. And what we've seen is totally something that's one-sided, absolutely one-sided.
Absolutely.
I mentioned earlier, what happened to Trump in 2016, and they dug into him before the election.
Oh,
so this whole thing with Biden's son, they said, "Oh no, we're not gonna deal with it during the election. We'll deal with it afterwards." Why? Because they want to nail Trump. They don't want to make him look bad, right? But how far this goes, who knows? But they're only presenting one side of the argument. All they say, they haven't proven fraud, they haven't this, they haven't that, because no one's listening to the case. None of the courts want to listen to the case.
Well, it's too hot to handle, right?
I challenge anybody, go back and Google Michigan legislature hearing. Google Georgia hearing. Go through 10 hours. You can fast forward it, right? You can hear them talk like chipmunks. And you'll see 10 hours in Michigan, person after person. This irregularity, that irregularity, multiple times putting ballots in, flipping the switch, all kinds of things. And they're saying there's no evidence. What do you mean there's no evidence? I mean, how do you see suitcases come out from underneath a table and there's no one to challenge it? In Georgia, 30,000 votes. Everybody's gone except 5 people. And they got that on video. They got that on camera. All these, how are you going to explain that? They got crazy explanations. How in the world are you going to explain there's nobody there? There's nobody there. What's the differential in vote total there? 10,000 votes, 12,000 votes. You got to throw out those ballots. No one saw them. You don't think that's proof? How can you say it's not proof? These are affidavits. These people go to jail for perjury. Hundreds and hundreds of affidavits. These people are getting harassed. People protesting in front of their home. All kinds of things. All kinds of things. Right? So where's the media? Where's the media? Where's Twitter? You cannot now say anything about fraud on YouTube. If you say fraud, they're not going to put it up there. Right?
What word? What word?
Right. There's censorship. There's censorship going on. Right? There was a hearing with Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook. And they kept asking questions about collusion with Twitter and Google, and he wouldn't answer. He refused to answer.
Oh, now they're going after tech.
He said, okay, we're going to take you down as saying that you're not willing to answer. He said, no, I got to speak to my lawyers. Then he goes, answer the question. We asked you a simple question. Are you doing this with Twitter and Google? And he would not answer. He wouldn't answer. So what would we say? Guilt by association. If you're not going to answer, what does that tell you? There's collusion. And they shut people's accounts down. Why? Because they didn't want to hear what they had to say. And they've knocked them down. Now, why is anyone speaking about that? Only the right-wing conservatives are speaking about it, nobody else. Because no one else wants to hear. There's suppression. Nobody wants to hear the truth because there's an agenda. Right? This is what politics is. Right? This is what the left wing does. So what happened to investigative reporting? They say they don't have, if anytime you Google anything about this whole thing, which I don't really want to get into, but anytime you Google it, it's all negative.
We're glad we're not getting into politics.
It's all negative. Giuliani's a fruitcake. They're a bunch of fanatics. Suck it up. This is what happened. You lost fair and square, and that's it. You don't see you have to look for the other side. But that's all they're saying. Oh, they lost again. Oh, they lost again. Because they didn't even hear the case. For goodness sakes, let them hear the case. Then they'll say, oh, it's not our jurisdiction. We'll pass it on. This isn't our jurisdiction. Oh, they're not saying you don't have proof. Because they're not even looking at the proof. They're trying to get somebody to get
subterfuge.
The only step they have left is to go back to the legislatures. That's it. If they go back to the legislatures and they have a referendum, maybe something will happen. Otherwise, otherwise that's it. No one's going to hear the case. And if this was the other way around, they'd be screaming bloody murder, right? So what are they spewing? So they're spewing their side of it, quote unquote, without looking into the facts. Now all of a sudden, finally, something's happened with Biden's son or whatever, which should be looked into. Why did that get suppressed? Why did all these things get suppressed? There's something that, there is something going on over here that, the left wing's got what to hide. And therefore, who do they have with them? They got the media. They got high tech, right? They got Twitter. They got Google. They got Facebook with them. That they're suppressing all kinds of things. Why? Why? Because they're not interested in the other side. Now, I'm not going to say it's ever this is something so polarized. You got to be blind not to see it, right? You might say, wow, hasn't it been always this way? It's not been as blunt as this, just because there's so much hatred for Trump. But it hasn't been this blunt. Okay, you have left wing, you could have conspiracy theories here and there. Never seen anything to the like of what it is now. Nothing.
I think they should just call it a draw and do a redo. That's my opinion, but I'm not an American, so
listen,
I can say what I want to say.
The other side is claiming it wasn't even close. Biden got wiped. That's what they're claiming with all the fraud. It wasn't even close, according to the numbers. But, okay, now try and go prove it.
Well, I think we mentioned this last week about a mistrial. I said it in another class. This could be a mistrial. Redo, when something's a mistrial in court.
You know what? They're not going to want to do it. No one wants to take responsibility over here, right? So,
and like you said today, the left would go nuts.
Rulers, even with the rulers, it says you can't befriend them. What they're going to do, but this is wide ranging over here. It's not just the rulers, because the rulers are in cahoots with others also, right? They're in cahoots with the newspapers. They're in cahoots with high tech. They're in cahoots with all kinds of things. And, like here, many times there's been attacks on newspapers, against certain candidates, let's say against Netanyahu, because why? Saying all these negative things, and it's libel, and they're making things up to make him look bad, and all this because the left wing has an agenda. They want to knock him off, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to, misinterpret his words. They're going to say things that probably aren't true, and all these things. There's collusion all over. The only question is, who gets the benefit of the doubt? Who's the one that gets in charge, and who's the one that's able to convince people of other things? But here it's all one-sided, right? So, but you have everybody together. So, so the point here is that anyone can be bought, right? The rulers can be bought. The rulers can be compromised. They'll do what it takes to benefit them. And if it means a lot more money, a lot more power, etc. So people will do what they want. There's, what's the morality of the time? It's called money. That's what it is. Mr. Ben Franklin, that's what it is, right? It's all about money and power. And most people, unless they're unbelievably moral, then they'll do whatever it takes to get to where they want to be. And that's a scary thought. And the reason is because, again, they have no anchor. They have no morality. And in the end, they're going to do whatever they want to do because it benefits them. And if that means we have years of friendship, I'm going to knock out my years of friendship. Why? Because it benefits me. And if I have to squash you,
Lord.
And this happens all the time, right? It happens all the time in politics. People who are good friends before something happens or whatever, someone gets abused. That's it, right? They knock them out. So they build people up. They knock people out. There's, there are a lot of things that happen underhandedly that, we're not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different things.
How can we know all?
Just one historical example. You look at the election 1960 between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Now, John F. Kennedy, how did he get in? Right, from my old alma mater from Boston. How did he get in? He got in because he took Ohio. Now, how did he end up taking Ohio? Because there was a crooked mayor there, right? Richard Daley, a big coke addict nonetheless. And he garnered a lot of, fraudulent votes, and that put him through. And that's what put him through, right? But even with all this, remember, we mentioned the verse in Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 10, the heart of a king is in the hand of God, right? So even with all this and all the evidence, you know what? God's saying, well, maybe I don't want Trump to be there anymore. He fulfilled his purpose. Now these other things have to happen, right? But, you could have all this evidence and it goes nowhere because he wants to knock people out, right? God wants to, knock someone out, put someone else in, right? But it's not about us, right? Because even politicians are being controlled. Even if they think, oh, I'm doing it myself and no one else is telling me what to do. There's no little birdie speaking in my ear. They're puppets. They are being controlled, right? They, whatever thoughts that are coming into their mind, it's not by themselves. One example, a few years ago in Turkey shot down an airplane of Russia, right? Now, Turkey is not a world power by any stretch. Turkey depends on Russia tremendously. Now, it would make no sense, for Turkey to do that. For whatever reason, the airplane didn't answer or whatever. So they have no interest in starting up with Russia. But what happens is the egomaniac, he wouldn't back down. He wouldn't apologize, right? And he didn't apologize. So Russia threatened them. He threatened them to no end. They're going to, sanctions and this and that. Why would somebody that stupid? I mean, he said a lot of crazy things, right? But why are you going to bite the hand that feeds you? Because of ego. You're going to say, we have a right. We're people. I can shoot your plane down if I want. But they're feeding you. They're helping you. They're giving you power. right? Now, there are other things going on behind the scenes of why Turkey not right now has to get knocked out, right? Why Russia may come and invade, etc. The whole question. Because the Vilna Gaon said, if Russia ever goes into Constantinople, i.e. Turkey, you don't take off your Shabbos clothes, meaning the Messiah is going to come. Now, it happened once before during World War II, but whatever, my Rebbe brought this down. There's a whole discussion, about this. But there are other things going on, much deeper things, that are going on behind the scenes. So if you look at it at face value, you're going to say Turkey have to be the biggest idiots in the world. Why in the world are they going to start up with Russia? Why? It's not like their army is like some powerful army, or they got all these nuclear weapons and planes. They're just going to blow Russia out of the sky. I don't think so. Right now, the last time I checked, they're nothing. Right? They're a nothing country. No offense to the Turks out there, but they're a nothing country. My language. So why are they going to start up with Russia? You know why they're going to start up with Russia? Because God pulled the strings over here. Right? He dug in the screws, and he says, and so the prime minister or president of Turkey said, we're not going to back down. Right? We're not going to back down to the Russians. We had a right to do this. He didn't apologize. Right? He didn't apologize. This guy's got an ego the size of, Yukon territory. Guy got a huge ego, right? But he's not going to start up the Russians for nothing, for no reason, right? So when the Vilna Gaon said this more than 250 years ago, that if something like this happens, the Messiah is very, very close. Very, very close. So how's God going to orchestrate this? How is he going to get Russia to go against Turkey? Now we see. They put down a plane. They don't apologize. Russia gets upset. Russia says, we're feeding you idiots. We're going to come in now and end our misery. And that could be the beginning of the end, right? It didn't happen, right? But I'm saying if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things. Now, we spoke about a lot of things. I'm sure people get ticked off, about American politics. But there's much bigger things on the horizon. This is not a blip in the screen here.
Oh, no.
This is a huge monumental change. However it ends up, right? However it ends up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
This
either
100% way could bring down the Republic in many, many ways. Many, many ways. And it's not unheard of because of what's going on. And now all these things are coming up with corruption in China, and this guy who was head of security, who knows what secrets he gave, all these things. All these things without getting into politics, I'll say for the 10th time, right? But it's a bigger picture. You got to be able to see the bigger picture over here. And I think it's amazing in some ways what in the world's going on. But one thing for sure, right, as we see by this Mishnah, you can never, ever trust any politician or in any ruler, because you know what? They could sell out their own people. They could sell out their own country. This guy is going to get knocked off as in the House of Representatives. This guy is with a Chinese spy. Who knows what he gave this person? Who knows how much he compromised? Jonathan Pollard did it, and he gave over information for for a friendly nation. He was 30 years solitary confinement, which makes no sense. Treason. You know what the punishment for treason is? Like 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years maximum in jail. He got 30 years. Finally got him out after 30 years. He was in solitary confinement. Not for an enemy. For someone who was a friend. Someone who was a friend of the U.S. So somebody like this, depending how far it goes, you think this guy's going to get 30 years solitary confinement? Never. Maybe he'll get 3 or 4 years if they prosecute him. But again, we have to look at things according to the Torah. But, we also have to try and see, what's really going on here, and what the bigger picture is. Now, like I always say,
not being
I never want to get too much into, into politics, in general, and the reason I did is because there's just so much out there, going on right now. And normally, like in the last 4 years, I'll just say on myself, in the last 4 years, I had no interest about, this whole collusion thing and Trump and, all these things. I had no interest. why do I have interest over here? Why would I waste my time listening to this in general? It's probably a waste of time in general, but I can't stand fraud. And I'm all about integrity, right? And therefore, if you see what's going on, just an inkling, you see what's going on, but you see the bigger picture and what possibly could happen. I mean, this is catastrophic. This is not something small. I'm not saying I should waste my time doing it, watching this stuff, but it's not something small by any stretch. And the irony of all ironies is that all this stuff is being suppressed, and that should scare the dickens out of anyone in the free world, because America represents the true republic of the world, the true democracy, and right now it looks like a banana republic. According to everybody, right now it looks like a banana republic. And if even a third or a half or a quarter of what these affidavits are saying is true, there's corruption at the highest level. You say, well, we already knew that. Yeah, but this is a whole different thing, because it comes down to the Constitution. And it comes down to whether you're going to uphold the Constitution or not. Now, if you're not going to uphold the Constitution, what does that mean?
What do you got?
That means it's all fraud. That means that nothing's real. That means they're really controlling things from the inside, whatever they want. That's not democracy. I mean, Israel claims to be a democracy, but they're not, because there are a lot of things they control from the inside that nobody sees. They want certain things to happen, it'll happen. But we're not a democracy. We may be the quote-unquote only democracy in the Middle East. Not a democracy. Don't make the mistake. It's definitely not a democracy. They want, just like China. If they say, listen, we're gonna build something, it's gonna go through your house or whatever. You got 48 hours to move. You can you can subpoena the high court. Do all these things. You can lose your house. How could that happen? Because it can happen. There are places that it can happen because they don't care.
Oh, Rabbi.
And power is going to absolutely, can absolutely be corrupted. And I think if people don't see this, and they don't understand what's going on right now, you're blind as a bat. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely blind as a bat. You're being spoon-fed from the garbage the media is telling you, right? Because there are 50 million things they're not telling you, and they're suppressing, which is just unbelievable. You say, yeah, it's a conspiracy theory. It's this, it's that. No. I challenge anyone. Watch these proceedings.
Numbers have to add up.
Watch what the people are saying they could go to jail because of perjury, of what they saw, right? Hundreds of people. You can't knock that out. You can't say there's no evidence. But if you're a reporter, and that's your job to report the news, how in the world does this not get any news? They just get made fun of. And you're just a conspiracy theory because they don't want you to buy into it. They want this guy to be president. That's all they want. They don't want anything else, and it doesn't matter how he got there. Doesn't matter if there's fraud. They want him to be there, right? And there's collusion. There's the media. There's high tech. There's all kinds of things at the highest levels going on. How it plays out, who's going to end up in jail and whatever, it's very interesting to see, right? And I'm not someone that's much bigger into, Israeli politics, not as much as American politics, but I think what you see now is just an unbelievable polarization of people who can look at what's going on with an objective mind, and people who are just being spoon-fed and brainwashed by the media. But even with all that, you can say, oh, it's garbage, it's this, it's that. You have to see what's going on. You have to see the bigger picture. When you see, if you understand the bigger picture a little bit, this is no different than what happened to Rome.
It makes this Mishnah ring true.
This is, I'm going to go on record here. This is no different than what happened in Rome, because Rome got eaten up from the corruption from the inside. And if you get, and this could absolutely happen. I mean, it's happening, but it could absolutely.
It's on the bubble.
It could spiral, go out of control, and bring it down.
Well, and the whole rest of the world. The whole rest of the world is just going to stand by and heaven forbid. But Hashem, like you mentioned, has it in his palm, right? The heart of a king.
Right. So the question is, okay, what does God want over here?
Yes.
It could be that now, what does America represent? America is Edom, right? The Western world. Western world has to fall, has to get demolished before the Messiah comes, right? So that could happen with the war, right? Gog and Magog could happen with the war, against the Arabs, against the Muslims, right? But they could
Could
be
happen
so
with a
weak.
vaccine that fails.
They could be so weak themselves and destroy themselves even before that happens. Now, is that going to happen? Okay, we have to see how it plays out. I'm just saying on either side of the equation, it's bad, right? In other words, if they overturn this, which I don't think they're going to do, if they overturn it, the left's going to take all these Black Lives Matter people, they're going to put them in the streets. They're going to destroy America. If it doesn't go through, then you can never trust anything that anyone says there anymore. That any elections, anything, that's all fraud, right? And whatever, it's going to continue. It's not going to just disappear.
We have to understand though that Hashem rules it all at the base.
I'm not saying not. What I'm saying is, this is what he wants to happen.
Of course,
that's what I'm just saying. If you look at what's on the ground and what's going on, yeah, he's turning the screws. He's absolutely turning the screws. I'm just saying on either side of the equation, it does not bode well. No. Right? In either case.
No, you've really made that clear. Even though you didn't want to talk about politics today.
I know. I'm saying either right. Either you're gonna have people protesting left and right and destroying cities, right? Or you're gonna have no integrity whatsoever, and the republic gets weaker that way. It gets more corrupt. Those are the only two situations. But that's because people can be bought, right? And that's the whole point over here. You can never trust politicians. Right, but this is, I had to speak about, what do you call it? Current issues, because this is exactly what it is, and this brought down other great empires. Right, you need integrity. If you don't have integrity, then you never trust anything. Right, and that's what the other side's saying over here. They're saying even if you want to, we're not necessarily trying to overturn the election, which they are, but they want to make sure in the future you're not going to have this problem. And in the future, there's going to be total integrity. Because if you don't have integrity, then you like Sodom. Then you like all these other places where it's not real. And then you like Venezuela, right? You got someone in power, they rig everything, and that's the way it is. And that's the way people are going to think, elections run, and everything else. Yeah.
Well, Rabbi, we've been going 2.5 hours. Any way we can wind this down on a positive note? I mean, not that your message today is just filled with words of wisdom.
I don't think there is any positive. There's no positive, because if a person has to deal with the ruler, you have to know who they are. You have to know they're basically like a snake. That's what you have to know. And you have to know they may just come out against you. They may just, they'll do whatever it takes to benefit them. But, as long as you realize that, then you'll never get caught. Then it's not going to matter that much, because, okay, they may have power this way, they may have power that way, but I have to understand how to deal with them. If I don't understand how to deal with them, so on the positive note, we can say, even if I don't understand, let's say, how to deal with them, I have to be careful, because they could totally demolish me in my time of need, right? So, okay, that's a little more... that's a little more positive. I have to understand where
there's some bitter medicine there, but
it is. Once I understand, what we've said up until this point, I don't think, most people would probably agree politicians are corrupt. What goes on is corrupt. I'm not saying it's all bad. Right? I'm not necessarily saying it's all bad, right? But the more corrupt it is, obviously, the worse it is. But a person has to realize this is the way it is. Right. And whatever people are doing, God's turning the screws, and you have to be careful, because if you're not careful, you get spit out, just like the Mishnah says. Right. They'll act friendly when it benefits them. They won't stand by someone in their time of need. So you have to be realistic. So I'm saying, anyone, if you want to stay squeaky clean, stay out of politics. Right. That's the message. Stay out of politics. If you want to get into politics, realize you'll probably never be squeaky clean. And these other people aren't squeaky clean, but you have to know how to deal with it. That's the message.
Wow. So we don't want to be wallowing in mire. I think that was beautiful, Rabbi. I'm not talking about
politics anymore. We're done.
No, there's so much eye-opening material in there, and I wish you and all Israel have a happy Hanukkah. Enjoy your time. Today's message was hot, so I think you just changed the direction of my life, to be honest with you. I just hope others caught a lot of what you said here today. I
If
think
Dan
there's
ever
a lot
goes
here
into
that can be
politics, don't vote for him. He'll be corrupt.
Oh, well, just last week, my employer sent me, I had to go sit in a city council meeting. And it's like, okay. You just, change the direction.
I would tell people, anyone who gets involved in politics, that, every day you should go to a mikveh. You should go at least to a body of water and dunk for holiness. That's what you need.
Wow.
That's exactly what you need because of all the, all the garbage you're going to hear.
The impurity.
But, I wish I had something more, more.
You know what?
positive.
This is the way ethics works. It has to integrate, and you need to understand the integrity that you're trying to get across. And it's not there in politics.
Ethics does not come with intelligence. They don't go hand in hand, right? And that we saw by what happened in Germany, right? Clear as day. So therefore, if you're not anchored, and you're not anchored in the right way to think, right, i.e., according to the Torah, then you will succumb to all kinds of things. Now, even if you are anchored in the right direction, you got to be very, very strong. Because if you're not strong,
you'd be
disillusioned,
right? For sure.
If you're not strong, then it's going to be very easy that you're gonna fall by the wayside.
Wow, Rabbi, I think we should wind it down. But so
Sounds
Hashem
good.
willing, are we on for next week?
Next week sounds like a plan. We'll finish up this mission, get to the next mission, hopefully, and whatever. We'll see where it goes. But hopefully, won't speak about too much about politics next week. We'll see what happens this week. You never know. But
if anybody's got any questions, they can find you. Where can they find you, Rabbi? Can they find you at Orthodox Conversion?
Facebook, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. They can find me there. They can send me an email, rabbichaimcoffman@gmail.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com.
All right, folks. Hope you got the message. So we're going to sign out for now. Till next week, folks. Pirkei Avos, live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Wow, what a message today. So till next week, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful day.